Chapter 15:13. Seeing the woman disappear, Yi Xian was a little dumbfounded. She left just like that? She didn't even say a word? After a while, Yi Xian put away his sword and continued to move forward. His expression was solemn. The demon beasts here were different from those he had encountered outside. Most importantly, the demon beasts here were not so stubborn. They were flexible and knew when to advance and retreat. Demon beasts were not scary. What was scary was that they were cultured. He knew that the road ahead might be a little difficult. An hour later, Yi Xian passed through the lake and entered a valley. On both sides of the valley, two mountains towered into the clouds. From time to time, birds would fly past. Yi Xian walked slowly in the valley. He was highly focused, and the sword in his hand was ready to be unsheathed at any time. He was best at sneak attacks, so he was afraid of being ambushed. After all, he did not have a strong physical body. If he was ambushed, he would be killed in one blow. About an hour later, Yi Xian entered the depths of the valley. In front of him, between the mountains, clouds and mist lingered, blurring his vision. Yi Xian held the sword in his hand tightly, his expression calm. He walked openly and did not hide his aura. In other words, if there were powerful demon beasts in this place, they would definitely be able to detect him. However, he did not feel the aura of demon beasts. Could there be no demon beasts? This thought popped up in Yi Xian's mind. However, at this moment, a mountain on his right suddenly trembled violently. The next moment, a black python broke out of the mountain. The python's head was as big as 3 bathtubs. Its bloody mouth was wide open and it went straight for Yi Xian, wanting to swallow Yi Xian in one bite. Seeing the sudden appearance of the python, Yi Xian reacted extremely quickly. He suddenly leaped and slashed with his sword. Sword drawing technique. As the sword slashed down, a ray of sword light fell directly on the head of the python. Boom. The sword light was directly shattered and Yi Xian was forced back nearly 100 feet. On the contrary, the python was not damaged at all. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's face darkened. The body of this giant python was at least at the peak of the consolidation realm. Although he had not reached the god realm, it was still very terrifying. In the distance, the giant python looked down at Yi Xian. Human. His voice was deep and carried a sense of oppression. Yi Xian nodded. The giant python stared at Yi Xian. Scram. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. In the next moment, he suddenly transformed into a ray of light that shot out explosively. Impudent. The giant python roared angrily. It directly collided with Yi Xian. Its strength was so great that it directly tore through space. Yi Xian's sword slashed at the python's head, and a sword light erupted from the python's head. Yi Xian retreated rapidly, but the python's head was also split open and blood splattered. Seeing that it had been injured by a human, the giant python was furious. It roared and was about to speak when a sword suddenly pierced its right eye. Boom. Blood splattered from the python's right eye, but the sword did not stop. It went straight through the python's body. Roar. A shrill scream suddenly resounded from the sky. In the air, the giant python trembled violently, then fell from the sky and finally smashed heavily to the ground. It was not dead yet. Yi Xian did not kill it as long as he won. He opened his palm and the sword flew back into his hand. Then he walked into the distance. On the ground, the giant python stared at Yi Xian. Human. Yi Xian still did not look back. At this moment, the giant python suddenly roared, "Human, this lord will not let you go." At this moment, a ray of light suddenly descended from the sky, and finally stabbed straight into the giant python's head. The giant python's voice stopped abruptly. In the distance, Yi Xian opened his palm, and a sword broke out of the giant python's body, and finally fell steadily into Yi Xian's hand. Yi Xian inserted the sword into the scabbard and continued to move forward. Along the way, Yi Xian closed his eyes slightly, thinking about the previous battle with the giant python. If it was a normal battle, it would have been impossible for him to kill this giant python so easily. Because although his sword-drawing technique could break the giant python's defense, it was not fatal. The reason why he was able to kill this giant python with one sword was because of the instantaneous slash. Of course, it was not just an instantaneous slash, but he found the giant python's weakness. Obviously, although the giant python's body was strong, its eyes were not. This reminded him of himself. Previously, he had a divine state body and his eyelids were very hard, but his eyes did not have such a strong defense. If someone's sword was so fast that he could not react and the sword pierced through his eyes, he might also be killed in an instant. Weakness. As a swordsman, one must be good at finding weaknesses, and starting from the weakness would yield twice the result with half the effort. Xian recollected his thoughts and quickened his pace. About an hour later he walked to the end of the valley. At the end of the valley Xian stopped, because in front of him was a giant python's head. It was the giant python that he had killed before. And on this giant python's head sat a man wearing a green robe, and the top of his head was densely covered with small snakes. These small snakes wriggled and looked extremely horrifying. The man looked at Xian and just looked at him. There was a trace of an evil smile on his face. Xian did not speak and continued to move forward. When he was about 100 feet away from the man suddenly turned into a green light and disappeared. Xian drew his sword and slashed. Boom! Where the sword light landed, green light swirled and the man retreated repeatedly. However, the space around Xian began to rot directly. Venom. Xian's brows knit together slightly. He took a step forward and activated his sword domain. In the next moment, countless rays of light crisscrossed and intersected within his sword domain, and it didn't take long for the venom around him to be completely destroyed. The man in the distance frowned. Domain. Xian glanced at the man and the man spoke in a low voice. Human, why have you come here? Xian gazed at the man. I'm just passing by. The man stared at Xian. Passing by? Xian nodded. The man gazed at Xian for a short moment before he said, I'll let you pass. Xian shook his head. Let's fight first. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia suddenly vanished on the spot, and a strand of sword light appeared in front of the man. The man's eyes narrowed slightly as he suddenly smashed his fist forward, and the space around him trembled. Rumble. The sword light was blasted apart, and the man was pushed over 100 m back. He just stopped when Xian appeared in front of him again, and then Xian swiftly drew his sword and slashed. A trace of ferocity flashed through the man's eyes, and then he swiftly raised his hands. In an instant the space where he and Xian resided had turned dark green. Xian immediately withdrew his sword and retreated 300 m away. He gazed at his sword. The supreme sword had turned dark green and it was being corroded. Fortunately, it possessed the ability to repair itself. However, his right hand didn't possess the ability to repair itself, so a large portion of it had been corroded to the point his bones were visible. If he hadn't retreated quickly, then not to mention his hand, even his entire body would have been crippled. After all, his body didn't possess the ability to repair itself. The man gazed at Xian. Do you still want to fight? Xian nodded. Yes. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot, and then a strand of sword light flashed. The man took a step forward and smashed his fist forward, and countless strands of green liquid swept out from his fist. Poison. When facing the poison, Xian immediately activated the sword domain. In the next moment, countless rays of sword light slashed down towards the man. This time the man actually didn't dodge at all and he allowed Xian's sword to stab his chest. However, Xian's sword had merely pierced half an inch into his chest before it was unable to go any further. On the other hand, Xian's expression changed drastically, and he instantly retreated explosively by over 1 kilometer. As soon as he stopped moving, the supreme sword in his hand had turned dark green. Moreover, a strand of formidable poison was moving along the sword and spreading towards his right hand. Xian's right hand suddenly shook, and then a strand of formidable sword intent surged out from it. The poison was eliminated, but the skin on his right hand had been completely corroded. Xian's face fell when he witnessed this scene. The man gazed at Xian from afar. You've come to temper yourself. Xian didn't answer the man. He gazed at the supreme sword in his hand. Why was my sword unable to resist this poison? It's definitely not because of my sword. My sword isn't strong enough. He didn't execute instakill because he wanted to temper his ability in close combat. Instakill was very formidable, but if a demon beast's physical defense was at the god rank realm, then his instakill would be useless. At that time it would be a competition of close combat. However, he hadn't imagined that the man's poison would actually be so formidable. Under the circumstances that he didn't execute instakill, it was utterly impossible for him to attack. Meanwhile, the man spoke again. Do you still want to fight? Xian glanced at his right hand. His right hand had almost recovered. Even though he didn't have the undying bloodline, his body possessed a certain level of ability to recover. Of course, it was far inferior to the undying bloodline. If he had the undying bloodline, then he could bathe in this poison. Unfortunately, he didn't. Yi Xian restrained his thoughts and gazed at the man. In the next moment he vanished on the spot. In the distance, the man's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he suddenly clenched his fists. In an instant, the space around him turned dark green. Poison. Suddenly, a strand of mysterious energy enveloped the man. In the next moment, countless rays of light crisscrossed and slashed within the sword domain, and the poison was instantly slashed into pieces. At the same time, a sword slashed towards the man's head. The man frowned slightly. He was just about to attack when the sword suddenly vanished. The man was slightly stunned. In the next moment he swiftly turned around and smashed his fist forward. A strand of light slashed from his fist, but it vanished as soon as it came into contact with his fist. In the next moment, countless rays of light appeared around the man. Hiss. Numerous sounds of slashing resounded incessantly. However, it only lasted for an instant. An instant later, the rays of light and the sword domain had vanished, and Yi Xian had returned to where he stood earlier. At this moment, the man's entire body was densely covered in scars. The man was just about to attack when Yi Xian had returned to where he stood earlier, and he was stunned. But in the next moment, Yi Xian had appeared in front of him again. A few dozen rays of light flickered around the man, but Yi Xian had returned to where he stood in an instant. This stunned the man who was about to counterattack. Because Yi Xian had fled by the time he was about to counterattack. Exhaustion. Fleeing after touching him a few times. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot again. The man's pupils constricted and he smashed his fist forward. However, he was stunned by this punch. Because Yi Xian hadn't attacked at all. His punch had struck a lonely figure. But right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly vanished once more. The man's expression changed abruptly because a sword had arrived directly above his head. The man clenched his fists tightly, and then countless strands of poison swept out from within him. However, Yi Xian had returned to where he stood at the instant the poison appeared. The poison had struck loneliness as well. Yi Xian was about to attack again when the man suddenly said, "Stop." Yi Xian gazed at the man and the man gazed at Yi Xian. "Big brother, I surrender. You can leave." As he spoke, he moved aside and made way for Xianxia. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 15-14. At that moment the man felt aggrieved. This was because speed was his weakness. His speed could not match up to Yi Xian's. Hence, if Yi Xian used this shameless method and Yi Xian's sword could break through his defense, there was nothing he could do. He could only admit defeat. If this went on, he would be exhausted to death. Yi Xian looked at the man and blinked. "Not fighting anymore?" The man shook his head. "Not fighting anymore. Admit defeat. Go away." Yi Xian was speechless. In fact, he was fighting with all his might. This was because he had learned a new way of fighting. In the past, he relied on his strong physique and bloodline power to face everything head-on. Of course, he could take it head-on. However, this made his swordsmanship very monotonous. What if he could not take it head-on? It was just like when he met someone as strong as the third lady. He still remembered the sparring session with the third lady. From the beginning to the end, he was completely suppressed. Why? Because he did not know how to change. If he met someone weaker than him, he could take it head-on. However, what if he met someone stronger than him? Swordsmanship was not a static thing. Just like earlier, he chose to take it head-on, but that would result in both of them suffering. This was because the man's venom could pose a threat to him, but after he changed his method, he was able to suppress the man. In the past, his swordsmanship had reached the stage of sword transformation, but at this moment he finally understood what transformation meant. Thinking of this, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He was glad that he met that swordsman. Otherwise, he would still be lost in external forces. There were some things that others said were useless. Only those who experienced it themselves would understand the truth. Just like when people say that it hurts to be cut by a knife, you would know the pain. However, if the knife did not cut you, you would not know how painful it was and you would not know what it felt like. At this moment, he gradually understood the real reason why swordsmen asked him to leave this mountain range. Yi Xian sheathed his sword and looked at the man. "Sorry for the offense." After that he continued to move forward. He came here to gain experience. If it wasn't necessary he naturally wouldn't make enemies. Meanwhile the man suddenly said, "You want to walk out like this?" Xian stopped in his tracks. He looked at the man and nodded. "Yes." The man shook his head. "You won't be able to leave." Xian smiled and asked, "Why?" The man looked at Xian. "You'd better go back now. Otherwise you'll definitely die inside." Xian was puzzled. "Why do you say that?" The man said indifferently, "Your arrival has already alarmed us. Right now countless greater demons already know of you. There are many great demons ahead waiting for you. They are all betting on how far you can go." Xian blinked. "You all know me?" The man nodded. Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, "Is it really that exaggerated?" The man said calmly, "It has already been close to 100 years since a human has set foot here. As soon as you step in here we can smell the scent of a human." Xian smiled sheepishly. "You won't gang up on me, right?" The man was expressionless. "Don't worry, we won't gang up on you. We don't want to gang up on you. But I can tell you that the road ahead of you will be very difficult." Xian said solemnly, "What rank do you belong to here?" The man glanced at Xian. "I refuse to answer this question." Xian was speechless. The man didn't say anything else. He turned around and left. Soon he disappeared into the distance. Where he stood, Xian was silent for a moment before he continued forward. "Fight your way out." This was the mission that swordsman had given him. Xian gripped the sword in his hand tightly and smiled coldly. "When have I ever been afraid of anyone?" Soon Xian disappeared at the end of the valley. Out of the valley, there was a vast plain with no end in sight. Xian continued forward. After walking for about 15 minutes, the ground in front of him suddenly began to tremble. Xian stopped and looked into the distance. At the end of his line of sight he could vaguely see a demon beast. This demon beast was huge and had 6 legs. On its back were 2 huge pairs of black wings. As the wings flapped, the space in front of them was directly torn apart. At this moment this demon beast was charging toward Xian. At the same time, a powerful aura directly locked onto Xian. The speed of the demonic beast was getting faster and faster, and its aura was getting stronger and stronger. When it was only 10,000 feet away from Xian felt as if a magnificent army was charging towards him. It was unstoppable. Xian's expression was extremely solemn. He gripped the sword in his hand tightly in his left hand. He had never felt such a powerful aura before. The mysterious woman and the others very rarely released their aura. Meanwhile, the demon beast was growing faster and faster, and its aura was actually increasing explosively at an extremely swift speed. Moreover, the space in front of Xian had actually started to warp. "I can't go against it." Such a thought suddenly arose in Xian's mind. Xian's face was gloomy. He knew that he'd lost the initiative. At this moment he'd been completely crushed in terms of aura. Retreat? If he retreated then he'd be in an absolutely disadvantageous position. Moreover, he couldn't retreat because his opponent's aura had completely locked down this area of space. At this moment he'd lost the initiative. If he attacked, then he could only go head-on against his opponent's aura. He wasn't confident at all. Xian felt slightly aggrieved. At this moment he thought of his body at the god realm. If he still had his body, then would he have to suffer such grievances? Without giving it any further thought, Xian took a step forward, and his sword domain directly enveloped the demon beast that had charged towards him. However, in an instant his countenance turned pale. At the same time his sword domain started to crack inch by inch. At this moment Xian couldn't be bothered about anything else, and he immediately drew his sword and slashed. Bang! An expanse of sword light descended, and then Xian's figure was blasted flying. He flew for over 3 kilometers before he smashed onto the ground, and he smashed open a hole that was over 30 m deep. Within the hole, Xian's right hand trembled while blood sprayed incessantly from his mouth. He'd been heavily injured by this strike. This time he hadn't just been suppressed by the demon beast's imposing aura, he'd even been suppressed by its strength. The demon beast's strength far surpassed his strength. After all, he didn't possess the strength of his body anymore, so his pure strength of the sword Dao couldn't compare to that demon beast. Xian didn't give it any further thought and immediately crawled up from the ground. Meanwhile, the demon beast that far surpassed him leaped up and smashed towards him. This collision was like a mountain smashing towards him, and Yi Xian's expression changed abruptly. He suddenly stomped his foot on the ground and transformed into a ray of light that vanished on the spot. When he appeared once more, he was over 100 m away, and the expansive space where he stood earlier had collapsed. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he witnessed this scene, because the strength of this demon beast was even stronger than his body at the god realm. The demon beast immediately turned around after its attack missed, and it gazed at Yi Xian with a ferocious glow in its eyes. Yi Xian held his sword in his right hand while blood was still flowing from the corners of his mouth. Right at this moment, the demon beast suddenly vanished on the spot. Yi Xian's pupils constricted abruptly. Damn it. Not only is this fellow's strength so formidable, his speed is actually so swift as well. Yi Xian didn't give it any further thought and immediately executed insta-kill. This strike slashed directly at the demon beast's right eye. However, right at this moment, the demon beast suddenly closed its eye. Bang! Yi Xian's sword was directly blasted away. Yi Xian was stunned. Damn it. What's that even possible? Meanwhile, the demon beast had already charged over to him, and Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He was utterly unable to dodge at such a distance, and he didn't even have his sword in his hand. So he could only use his body to go against it. He had no choice but to go against it. Yi Xian suddenly crossed his arms before pushing them forward. Bang! Along with the sound of two bones breaking, Yi Xian's figure was blasted flying for over 10 kilometers, and he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood essence as soon as he stopped. The demon beast didn't attack again, and it just gazed at Yi Xian with eyes filled with ridicule. So weak. I've been looked down upon. Yi Xian glanced at the demon beast. At this moment, the bones in his arms had been shattered. Regardless of whether it was in terms of speed or strength, he didn't have any advantage at all. How should I fight it? Flee? Running away was the best choice. However, he didn't want to flee. Can I not use my sword just because I don't have my hands? Yi Xian issued a command in his heart, and the supreme sword in the distance suddenly transformed into a ray of light that slashed at the demon beast. However, the demon beast didn't dodge at all and allowed the sword to strike its body. Bang! The ray of light shattered while Yi Xian's sword was blasted away, and there was only a mark on the demon beast's head. Yi Xian was speechless. The demon beast gazed at Yi Xian and laughed with ridicule. That's it. Yi Xian fell silent. Now he'd realized how abnormal his strength was. If one's body was sufficiently strong, then one would be invincible. Right at this moment, the demon beast suddenly leaped up and collided with Yi Xian again. Yi Xian's pupils constricted, and he tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and floated backwards. He just floated away when the space in front of him had turned pitch black. Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something when he saw that pitch black space, and he suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, causing a mysterious force to envelop the demon beast. Darkness. At the instant the darkness appeared, the pitch black space where the demon beast resided started to explode apart, and the demon beast was blasted over 100 m away. At this moment, numerous cracks had appeared on its body. Yi Xian was delighted when he witnessed this scene. Darkness. The power of the darkness depended on the amount of dark matter energy, and after the demon beast crashed into that space, the dark space was filled with dark matter energy. He directly used the darkness to detonate the dark matter energy in that space. He hadn't expected the power to be so great. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian's mind moved, and an illusory dark energy sword suddenly condensed in that dark space. In the next moment, the sword slashed towards the demon beast in the distance. This sword didn't just contain the darkness, it also contained the sword domain. The power of the two domains combined. The demon beast didn't dodge and chose to take it head-on. Boom! The sword slashed against the demon beast's head, and the demon beast retreated over 100 m away. At the same time, a bloody mark appeared on its head. The demon beast was stunned. Its defense had been broken. The demon beast looked at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian twisted his buttocks and smiled wickedly. That's it? That's it? That's it? The demon beast was speechless. P.S. Asking for votes. Asking for support. Chapter 15:15. The demon beast was infuriated. It leaped up and smashed towards Yi Xian. This collision was simply capable of obliterating the world, and the space in its path collapsed inch by inch. Yi Xian's eyelids twitched when he witnessed this scene. Damn it. This demon beast is really strong. He didn't give it any further thought and he issued a command in his heart. The supreme sword in the distance suddenly transformed into a ray of light that slashed towards the demon beast. At the same time he retreated explosively. Bang! His sword had just struck the demon beast's head when it was blasted flying. But at this moment, Yi Xian had retreated over 1 kilometer away. The demon beast was just about to attack once more when the distant Yi Xian grinned instead. The demon beast's expression instantly changed drastically when it saw Yi Xian's smile. Because the space it was in had already collapsed from the collision, and it was within this spatial black hole. Moreover, it was filled with dark matter energy. The demon beast was about to retreat when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Explode." Bang! The pitch-black space suddenly exploded, and all the dark matter energy inside was detonated by Yi Xian with the dark domain. This explosion was simply capable of obliterating the world. With the demon beast at the center, the space in an area of over 3 kilometers was instantly turned pitch black. At this moment both man and beast were within a spatial black hole. When the demon beast stopped moving, many of its scales had exploded apart and it was badly mangled. However, this wasn't the end of it. Because both it and Yi Xian were within a dark space and there was boundless dark matter energy here. Yi Xian grinned as he gazed at the demon beast, and then he issued a command in his heart. In an instant, the dark matter energy in the surroundings suddenly transformed into numerous energy swords. In an instant, Yi Xian had transformed into over 100,000 energy swords. The demon beast's expression instantly changed when it saw those energy swords. It started to retreat slowly. Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, and his sword domain enveloped the demon beast. In the next moment he suddenly roared furiously, "Explode." As soon as he finished speaking, the energy swords transformed into rays of sword light that slashed towards the demonic beast. The pupils of the demon beast constricted abruptly. Its wings suddenly unfolded, and then they transformed into a wing shield that blocked in front of it in a defensive posture. In the blink of an eye, one explosion after another sounded out from within the black hole. This continued for a full 15 minutes before the energy swords finished exploding. By this time the demon beast had been forced back more than 3,000 meters. At this moment the demonic beast's appearance could not be said to be a little miserable. This was because its pair of wings had been shattered and its body was covered in bloody sword wounds. Blood spurted out from its body like a fountain. Fortunately its body was big enough. Otherwise it would have died from the spurting. At this moment Yi Xian's face was extremely pale. Weakness. Right now he felt incomparably weak. Controlling 2 domains and so many sword chi was extremely taxing on his stamina. That attack just now had almost exhausted him. After losing his god realm body, his body was not as good as before. The demon beast suddenly raised its head and gazed at Yi Xian, and its eyes were filled with killing intent and viciousness. "Human. You've infuriated me." Yi Xian blinked and said, "Look around you." The demon beast glanced at the surroundings. At this moment, it and Yi Xian were still within the black hole. Moreover, the black hole had grown even larger from the force of the attack just now. The demon beast's eyelids twitched when it witnessed this scene. It noticed that Yi Xian's strength was much stronger within such a black hole. Yi Xian issued a command in his heart, and then the dark energy in the surroundings suddenly started trembling. It didn't take long for over a dozen energy swords formed from dark energy to appear in front of Yi Xian. The demon beast's face twitched when it witnessed this scene, and it stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "Human. Do you dare use a sword?" "What the fuck?" Yi Xian's jaw almost hit the floor when he heard this, and he gazed at the demon beast with slight disbelief. "Are you even human?" The demon beast roared furiously, "I'm not human." Yi Xian was speechless. The demon beast stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "Human. Do you dare to fight me without using a sword?" Yi Xian gazed at the demon beast and shook his head. "I'd thought that my skin was thick enough, but I never expected that there would be someone even thicker. Tell me, if I don't use a sword, then what should I use? Fight you with my head?" The demon beast roared furiously. "As long as you don't use a sword, you can use anything." Yi Xian was speechless. Damn it. Is this demon beast underage? It's actually speaking such childish words. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian's pupils constricted and he gazed at the demon beast. Damn it. You're buying time. As soon as he finished speaking, the black holes in the surroundings actually started to recover slowly. There were laws in the world, and so long as space wasn't directly obliterated, then it could be recovered. At this moment, the space in the surroundings was automatically recovering. This demon beast wasn't stupid, but it was very shrewd. This guy had been stalling for time. The demon beast looked coldly at Zhou Xian. Human, you're not that stupid. As it spoke, the surrounding space had already recovered by 60 to 70%. Seeing this scene, Zhou Xian's face suddenly sank, and as if he'd thought of something, he suddenly looked at the demon beast. You seem to be badly injured. The demon beast sneered. Aren't you also badly injured? Zhou Xian blinked. Do you have any other enemies in this mountain range? Hearing this, the demon beast frowned. Seeing this scene, Zhou Xian chuckled. If we continue to fight, both sides will only suffer. How about this? Let's both recuperate first and then continue fighting after we've recovered. He needed time now as well because the bones in his arms had been shattered by this demon beast. But it was good because it allowed him to comprehend the combination of the sword domain and darkness domain. It could be said that his sword would become even stronger after they were combined. Especially when his opponent or himself shattered the space in the surroundings. Under such circumstances, his combat strength would increase by an unknown amount while he was within the sword domain. The sword domain naturally couldn't be considered as an external force. Moreover, he'd even combined the sword domain and darkness domain. This could be said to be an extension of his sword Dao. The demon beast fell silent when it heard Zhou Xian. It was naturally not stupid, and it knew that if they continued fighting, then it was very likely that both sides would suffer heavy injuries. Moreover, if it were to suffer heavy injuries now, then once its enemy took advantage of the situation, then it would be extremely disadvantageous to it. After all, it didn't have any deep enmity with this human before it, and they were merely on different sides. When it thought up to here, the demon beast gazed at Zhou Xian. Then let's rest for a while before we continue fighting. Zhou Xian nodded. Alright. The demonic beast slowly retreated, but Zhou Xian did not move. He had to watch the demonic beast retreat. Otherwise, if the demonic beast launched a surprise attack, it would be very difficult for him to defend against it in his current state. After the demonic beast left, Zhou Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and began to recuperate. Without the power of the bloodline, he could only use Xianqi to repair his body. Although it was very slow, he had no other choice. While he was recuperating, he kept thinking about the fight with the demon beast. In the beginning, he was crushed by the demonic beast's aura, which led to him being suppressed. Imposing manner. Zhou Xian took a deep breath. He had used his sword force before, but he realized that his force was much weaker than the demonic beast's. What was momentum? Zhou Xian he fell into deep thought. He suddenly discovered that after he abandoned his physical body and bloodline power, he could discover his own inadequacies at every moment. There were simply too many inadequacies. Just like that, after about 2 hours, Zhou Xian's arms recovered to their original state, and the injuries on his body had also recovered by 80% to 90%. Zhou Xian stood up and moved his body. The bones in his body immediately made cracking sounds. Zhou Xian took a deep breath. He opened his left hand and the unparalleled sword appeared in his hand. Looking at the sword in his hand, Zhou Xian smiled slightly and continued forward. He realized that the moment he held the sword he was more confident than before. This confidence was something that he had fought for. Zhou Xian continued forward. After about 2 hours he saw the demonic beast that fought with him earlier. At this moment the demonic beast's injuries had almost recovered. The demonic beast looked at Zhou Xian with a much calmer gaze than before. Zhou Xian suddenly smiled and said, "Come and fight." As soon as his voice fell, he suddenly charged towards the demonic beast. He was charging. The demonic beast was instantly stunned when it saw Zhou Xian suddenly charge over. This fellow is actually taking the initiative to attack? When Zhou Xian charged towards the demonic beast, he had a smile on his face as if he was certain that he would be able to eat the demonic beast. At the same time, a strand of sword energy enveloped the demonic beast. The demonic beast frowned slightly as it gazed at Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian's gaze and smile made it feel very uncomfortable, and it felt like Zhou Xian was certain that he would be able to eat it. The demonic beast suddenly leaped up and directly collided with Zhou Xian. This collision caused the space around it to tremble, but it didn't shatter. Obviously, it had restrained its strength. It had no choice but to retract its strength. Once space shattered, then this human's combat strength would instantly soar. He was still slightly afraid of those two domains. The human and beast had chosen to fight head-on as soon as they met. When Yi Xian arrived above the demonic beast's head, he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Sword drawing technique. This strike directly tore space apart. At the same time, the sword domain appeared along with it. Bang! Yi Xian's sword struck the demonic beast's head. In an instant, his figure was blasted flying while the demonic beast was blasted down from the sky by the formidable force within Yi Xian's sword. In the end, it crashed heavily onto the ground. As soon as it crashed onto the ground, the demonic beast stood up, and it raised its head to look at Yi Xian, who was in the distance. At this moment, Yi Xian was already over 1 kilometer away from it. The demonic beast revealed a savage smile and was about to attack. However, right at this moment, a crack resounded as the space in front of it collapsed completely. In an instant, the space in front of it had become pitch black. The demonic beast's expression changed drastically when it witnessed this scene, and it was about to retreat. However, right at this moment, countless dark energy swords had suddenly appeared within the darkness. In the next moment, these dark energy swords shot violently towards it. Moreover, it possessed the sword domain. The demonic beast's face twitched slightly. This time, it didn't choose to go head-on against Xianxi's attack. It just turned around and leaped, and it instantly appeared 3 kilometers away. Yi Xian was stunned when he witnessed this scene. Damn it! This fellow isn't going to go head-on against me? The demonic beast gazed at Yi Xian from afar. It didn't move, and it was waiting for the shattered space to repair itself. On the other hand, Yi Xian naturally understood the demonic beast's intentions. So, he just didn't allow the space to repair itself, and he constantly used his swords to destroy the space in front of him. Just like that, the human and the demonic beast stood in confrontation. This confrontation lasted for an entire day and night. Neither was willing to retreat. In the distance, the demonic beast gazed at Yi Xian and sneered. "Human, aren't you tired?" Yi Xian fell silent. "Damn it. This fellow intends to fight me to the end." Chapter 15-16. The demon beast immediately lay down on the ground and prepared to fight a long battle. Yi Xian glanced at the demon beast. He was helpless against it when it acted wretchedly. Even though his sword was swift, it wasn't able to instantly annihilate the demon beast. Moreover, he could only suppress it by utilizing his sword domain. However, the demon beast would flee as soon as he tore open space. Most importantly, the demon beast would pursue him as soon as he retreated. He was trying to fight a battle of attrition with him. Yi Xian was slightly speechless because no one could do anything to this demon beast. Daodu. But he couldn't afford to waste time. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and ran. The demon beast suddenly leaped up and smashed against Yi Xian when it saw this scene. Everywhere it passed, space warped, but it didn't shatter because it controlled its strength. Yi Xian suddenly stopped in the distance, and then he swiftly drew his sword and slashed it forward. The target of this attack wasn't the demon beast but the space in front of him. As soon as his sword descended, the space in front of him shattered. However, the demon beast suddenly stopped. In the next moment, it turned around and leaped over 3 kilometers away. However, a sword suddenly slashed down towards it as soon as it stopped. The space in front of the demon beast was instantly torn apart. The demon beast's pupils constricted when it saw space being torn apart, and it didn't even hesitate to turn around and flee. It was extremely swift, and it was 3 kilometers away in the blink of an eye. However, another sword slashed down towards it as soon as it stopped fleeing. But space wasn't torn apart this time. The demon beast didn't retreat this time, and it allowed Yi Xian's sword to strike its head. Bang! An expanse of sword light shattered. The demon beast forcefully resisted this attack. This time it didn't allow Yi Xian's sword to fly away. It suddenly slapped Yi Xian's sword to the ground, and then it pressed down forcefully onto Yi Xian's sword. The demon beast gazed at Yi Xian and sneered, "Human, you don't have a sword anymore." Yi Xian fell silent, and his expression seemed to be quite unsightly. The demon beast smiled with slight complacency. "Human, you're anxious. It's my turn." As it spoke, it suddenly leaped up to the top of Yi Xian's head, and then it suddenly slapped its palm towards Yi Xian. As the palm descended, it felt like a mountain was pressing down on him. The space around Yi Xian directly twisted into a strange spatial vortex. The space did not shatter. Yi Xian was a little shocked. This demonic beast's control over its own strength was not ordinary. Without much thought he opened his palm, and the executing heaven sword appeared in his hand. In the next moment he suddenly slashed forward. The target of this slash was still not the demonic beast but the space in front of him. The space he was in was already on the verge of collapse due to the power of the demonic beast. As he slashed down with his sword, the space instantly collapsed. However, Xian was sent flying. That was because the strength of his sword was not as strong as the strength of the demonic beast. However, the moment he flew out, countless energy swords suddenly appeared in the shattered space. In the next moment, those energy swords were directly detonated by Xian. Rumble. Between heaven and earth, a deafening explosion sounded like a clap of thunder. In an instant the demonic beast was directly blasted away. However, that was not the end of it. When the sword chi was detonated by Xian, the space within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was directly blasted apart and turned pitch black. In the distance Xian suddenly roared furiously, "Condense!" As soon as he spoke, the dark energy directly transformed into numerous energy swords. In an instant over 100,000 energy swords were condensed. However, Xian's face also turned pale at this moment. The consumption was too great. Without thinking too much, Xian was about to detonate the sword chi when the demonic beast in the distance suddenly roared furiously, "Human, I surrender." Surrender? Hearing this, Xian was directly stunned. He looked at the demonic beast. At this moment the demonic beast was completely mutilated. Especially its wings, one of which had even been blasted off. It looked extremely miserable. The demonic beast looked at Xian. "You win." As soon as it finished speaking, it turned around and fled, and it vanished at the end of the plains in the distance in the blink of an eye. Xian heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the demonic beast flee. Actually, he was unable to detonate it any longer. Because he'd already reached his limits, and if he forcefully detonated it, then it would be no different than taking the demonic beast down with him. Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and started to recuperate. He was completely exhausted from the battle with the demonic beast earlier, and if this demonic beast hadn't been slightly careless, then he might have really been exhausted to death by it. Needless to say, this battle with the demonic beast allowed him to notice many things that he was lacking in. Speed wasn't absolute. Even though his speed crushed the demonic beast, his strength was insufficient, and his sword was unable to pose a lethal threat to a demon beast at the god rank realm. The speed of his sword was barely fast enough, but it wasn't strong enough. Fortunately, he'd gained quite a bit from the battle with the demonic beast, and the greatest gain was his grasp of the sword domain. His current sword domain wasn't as useless as it was in the past. After an hour, Xian stood up and stretched his body. At this moment his body had already mostly recovered. Needless to say, he still slightly missed the god rank realm physical body and undying bloodline from before. With the god rank realm physical body and undying bloodline, he could forcefully exhaust that demonic beast to death. Of course, without the god rank realm physical body and undying bloodline now, he wasn't afraid of that demonic beast. Xian glanced at the sword in his hand, and then he grinned lightly and continued forward. Even he himself didn't notice that his mentality had already undergone a change. More and more confident. And this confidence came from the sword in his hand. For hours later, Xian walked out of that plain. He stood on the spot, and before him was a dense forest that had no end. Xian glanced to the left and right at the horizon. At this moment the sky was already dark. After a moment of silence, Xian glanced at that dense forest. The dense forest was very quiet and there wasn't the slightest sound. It's definitely not normal. Xian glanced to his left and right and he realized that he could take a detour, but it would only take 1 to 4 more hours. After a moment of silence, Xian finally did not choose to take a detour, because he was here to gain experience. Wherever there was danger he would go. After entering the dense forest, his vision instantly darkened, and a sense of oppression assaulted his face. Xian walked slowly, unhurriedly. At this moment Xian stopped and around him the trees suddenly trembled. Xian slowly closed his eyes, and a voice suddenly sounded in his mind, "Human?" Xian nodded. That voice was a little surprised. "Human, how dare you step into this place?" Xian smiled. "To gain experience." That voice said, "But it's very dangerous here." Xian opened his eyes, he glanced around and there was nothing around. At this moment that voice laughed, Human, you can't see me. Yi Xian smiled. Why? That voice said, because I'm a wood spirit. Do you know what a wood spirit is? A spirit of heaven and earth. Yi Xian was slightly shocked. This mountain range didn't just have demon beasts, there were also spirits of heaven and earth. At this moment the wood spirit said, Human, ahead is the territory of the great ferocious beast demon king Xiu. That demon beast is very very powerful and his temper is very very bad. You must not go or you'll die. Yi Xian said with a smile, Why did you remind me? Wood spirit said, Because if I don't warn you, you might die. Yi Xian was stunned and then he smiled, Thank you. Wood spirit smiled, You're welcome, quickly go back. Yi Xian shook his head, I can't go back. Wood spirit was slightly puzzled. Why? Yi Xian smiled, I want to become stronger. Wood spirit said, But I feel that you're already very strong. Yi Xian smiled, Not enough. Wood spirit said, I understand. You want to become even stronger. Yi Xian smiled, Yes. As he spoke he continued forward. Meanwhile, a wooden bottle suddenly floated over to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. What's this? Wood spirit said, Essence wood spirit liquid, it can be used to heal injuries. Keep it for yourself. Yi Xian smiled. Needless to say, these spirits of heaven and earth were very kind indeed. He could sense the wood spirit's kindness, that kind of sincere kindness. Yi Xian didn't refuse. He put the wooden bottle away and smiled. Thank you. Wood spirit smiled. You're welcome. Human, take care. Yi Xian nodded and smiled. I'll give you something as well. As he spoke he opened his palm and strands of violet energy floated towards the surroundings. Meanwhile the wood spirit was shocked. Wow. Human, what kind of violet energy is this? The energy here is actually so pure, I've never seen such pure energy. Yi Xian smiled. Do you like it? Meanwhile, a woman suddenly appeared not too far away from Yi Xian. She wore a green dress, had exquisite features and seemed like a fairy. The woman's eyes opened wide as she gazed at the violet energy and she was very shocked. Yi Xian smiled. I'll give it all to you. The woman gazed at Yi Xian and blinked. You're giving it all to me? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The woman hesitated for a moment and said, It's very precious. Yi Xian waved the wooden bottle in his hand and smiled. This is very precious as well. The woman shook her head. It's not as precious as this violet energy. This violet energy might be able to allow me to evolve. Yi Xian smiled. Quickly accept it. The woman hesitated for a moment and said, Then I'll accept it. Yi Xian nodded. Take it. The woman gazed at Yi Xian and said in a soft voice, Thank you. As she spoke she sniffed lightly, and the violet energy instantly entered her body. As soon as the violet energy entered her body suddenly trembled, and then a strand of pure energy swept out from within her. At the same time the trees in her surroundings actually started wriggling. Yi Xian sized the woman up. She's about to break through. Is Xiaota's energy so terrifying? The violet energy he gave the woman earlier wasn't his own, but it was from Xiaota. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he asked Xiaota to withdraw some violet energy. In next to no time the surroundings were covered in violet energy. Yi Xian glanced at the woman before he left. He didn't know how long it would take for the woman to break through, but he knew that it would definitely take a long time. So he couldn't waste too much time here. 2 hours later Yi Xian walked out of the dense forest. As soon as he walked out, a voice suddenly resounded from not too far away. I've been waiting for you. Chapter 15-17. Yi Xian looked up and there was a demon beast standing not too far away from him. The demon beast was like an ape and it was as strong as a hill. His arms were like pillars and it had a tail behind it. Demon King Xiu. Xiu looked down at Yi Xian. Human, you want to go through the Great Desolation Mountain Range? Yi Xian nodded. Xiu spread its legs and smiled. Don't say that I didn't give you a chance. Come, go under my crotch. Yi Xian nodded and then he walked over to Xiu. In the next moment he suddenly drew his sword and stabbed it towards Xiu's crotch. Bang! A ray of light stabbed Xiu's crotch, but Xiu's crotch wasn't damaged at all. After his attack failed, Yi Xian instantly retreated 300 m. Xiu looked down at Yi Xian, patted his crotch and sneered, That's it? Yi Xian clenched his sword tightly in his left hand. The defense of Xiaochu's body was even stronger than the demon beast he'd encountered earlier. Another tough nut to crack. However, there wasn't a trace of fear in his eyes, and there was even more excitement. Xiaochu sneered. A tiny ant dares to trespass into my great desolation mountain range? You really don't know your place. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "You talk a lot of bullshit." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. A ray of light slashed down towards Xiaochu's head. Xiaochu sneered and didn't dodge, allowing Yi Xian's sword to strike its head. Bang! The ray of light exploded, but there wasn't even a mark left on Xiaochu's head. However, the space above its head had been slashed apart. Xiaochu looked at Yi Xian and ridiculed, "Human you." Suddenly, over 100 dark swords of energy appeared in the pitch-black space above its head. Xiaochu frowned slightly when it sensed this scene and it looked up. Meanwhile, the dark swords of energy exploded. Rumble. Along with an explosion, the space around Xiaoqinxing shattered apart, and the powerful force blasted Xiaoqinxing 300 m away. At the same time, the space in an area of 3 kilometers had turned pitch black. After elegant capture stopped, its expression directly became hideous because over 100 blood-colored sword scars appeared all over its body. Graceful capture looked at the distant Yi Xian, and at this moment, in front of it was a dense swarm of dark energy swords, numbering in the tens of thousands. In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly issued a command in his heart, and the tens of thousands of swords shot directly towards Xiaochu. Xiaochu's eyes narrowed slightly when he witnessed this scene. In the next moment he took a step forward and suddenly smashed his fist forward. This punch shook the heavens and earth. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, countless energy swords shattered, and numerous explosions resounded ceaselessly while elegant capture retreated explosively. In the process of elegant capture retreating, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot, and in the next moment, sword lights flickered ceaselessly around elegant capture. Chi 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 chi. The sound of sword chi tearing through space resounded incessantly. Just like that, after around 15 minutes passed, Yi Xian returned to where he stood earlier, and all the sword chi had vanished. Elegant capture was still alive. Even though its entire body was covered in blood-red sword scars, they weren't lethal, and they were equivalent to the skin of a human. Yi Xian gazed at elegant capture with a trace of seriousness in his eyes. This demon king's body wasn't just a little bit stronger than the demon beast he'd encountered earlier. Elegant capture glanced at its body, and then it gazed at Yi Xian and ridiculed, "Is that all?" As he spoke, he punched Yi Xian. Bang! A powerful force swept through the surroundings, and everywhere it passed, space collapsed inch by inch. The instant Xiaoqinxing punched out, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared from where he stood. In the next moment, a sword fell straight down from above Xiaoqinxing's head. It was extremely fast and it instantly stabbed into Xiaoqinxing's head. Bang! The sword shook violently while Yi Xian felt his arms go numb. It was like he'd stabbed a piece of hard iron. Elegant Capture's head wasn't damaged at all. After his attack failed, Yi Xian immediately stabbed his sword towards Elegant Capture's right eye. Meanwhile, Elegant Capture suddenly closed his eyes. Bang! Yi Xian's attack failed once more. At the same time, a powerful force blasted him flying, and at the instant he was blasted flying, Elegant Capture suddenly turned around and smashed his fist forward. Rumble! The space in front of him shattered into pieces. Yi Xian was blasted 3 kilometers away, and he just stopped when Elegant Capture smashed his fist towards him once more. Yi Xian felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on him when this punch came. It was suffocating pressure. Yi Xian suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and his entire body flashed back 10,000 feet. As soon as he dodged, the space in front of him instantly turned pitch black, and the powerful impact once again blasted him several thousand feet back. After he stopped, Yi Xian suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Sword drawing technique. A ray of sword light shot into the sky and slashed down. In the distance, Elegant Capture suddenly raised his right hand to block. The sword light descended. Bang! Elegant Capture's right arm had forcefully blocked Yi Xian's sword strike. Elegant Capture lowered his right arm, and at this moment, a sword suddenly stabbed towards his throat. Bang! Elegant Capture's body trembled violently, but in the next moment he suddenly smashed his fist forward. Rumble! Yi Xian's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly raised his sword to block. Bang! Yi Xian was blasted 3 kilometers away along with his sword. After he stopped, a wisp of blood slowly seeped out from the corner of Yi Xian's mouth. He wiped the blood off the corner of his mouth and then he looked at Elegant Capture. This fellow is too tough. I can't break through his defense. Actually, he could ignite his lifespan to execute the life sword. If he ignited his lifespan now and utilized the sword drawing technique or instant death, then he was entirely capable of breaking through Elegant Capture's defense. However, igniting his lifespan was equivalent to using an external force. Meanwhile, Elegant Capture suddenly leaped up, and then he suddenly smashed his fist towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian's expression changed slightly when he saw this scene, and then his figure shook and vanished on the spot. Bang! Elegant Capture's punch struck empty air, but the space where Yi Xian stood had transformed into an enormous pitch-black hole. Yi Xian didn't utilize the dark domain because even if it was combined with the sword domain, it was still unable to break through Elegant Capture's defense. Elegant Capture's punch struck empty air, and then he turned to look at Yi Xian in the distance and laughed coldly. "Human, do you only know how to dodge?" Yi Xian glanced at Elegant Capture. "Why do you have so much nonsense to say?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. A strand of sword light instantly slashed against Elegant Capture's chest. However, it still wasn't able to break through Elegant Capture's defense. Elegant Capture raised his hand and punched again. Bang! The sword light shattered into pieces while Yi Xian had retreated over 1 kilometer away. As he retreated, countless flying swords slashed towards Elegant Capture. These flying swords were extremely swift, and they struck all over Elegant Capture's body in the blink of an eye. However, Elegant Capture had forcefully resisted all of them. He resisted them forcefully. Elegant Capture patted his chest and laughed coldly. "Human, you're trying to find a flaw in my defense." Yi Xian fell silent. He was indeed trying to find a flaw in Elegant Capture's defense. Unfortunately, this fellow didn't seem to have any flaws at all. There was nowhere to attack. Elegant Capture suddenly said, "Human." Yi Xian suddenly spoke angrily. "It's just a fight. Why do you have so much nonsense to say?" As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot. A strand of sword light flashed. In the distance, Elegant Capture's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he suddenly smashed his arms forward. Rumble! The strand of sword light was instantly shattered. But in the next moment, a few more strands of sword light appeared around it. Just like that, the man and beast entered into battle once more. Yi Xian didn't choose to fight Elegant Capture head-on, and he chose to exhaust it instead. If a single strike couldn't break through its defense, then what about 100, 1,000, or even 10,000? Could only be described as grinding. However, it was very dangerous. Because while Elegant Capture's speed was inferior to his, its strength far surpassed his. So long as he wasn't careful, he might be killed by a single punch. Just like that, Yi Xian forcefully tortured Xianxia for 4 hours. At this moment, Xianxia's body already had many blood-colored sword scars. Although they were not deep, these sword scars were getting deeper and deeper. Because every single strike of Yi Xian's would strike those marks. On the other hand, Elegant Capture grew more and more restless. Because he noticed that he couldn't do anything to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was too wretched. Yi Xian never fought it head-on. Each of its punches had the power to destroy the world. However, Yi Xian just did not take it head-on. That made it extremely angry. And it was exactly because of this that it became more and more agitated as it fought. On the other hand, Yi Xian grew more and more excited as he fought. Because he noticed that the strength of his sword was growing stronger and stronger. Moreover, he also discovered that his reaction speed had become faster. Because the slightest carelessness might cause him to be heavily injured when fighting Elegant Capture. So he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Just like this, time passed bit by bit and Yi Xian tortured Xianxia for an entire 6 hours. At this moment, the sword marks on Xianxia's body were getting deeper and deeper, and its entire body was already dyed red with blood. On the other hand, Yi Xian's countenance was slightly pale. Because he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. So he'd been maintaining a high degree of concentration throughout these past few hours. Such concentration consumed a lot of his strength. However, he grew more and more excited as he fought. Moreover, he seemed to have entered into a strange state. Presently, his mind was filled with a single thought, and that was to fight. A frenzied battle. Numerous rays of light crisscrossed ceaselessly. Yi Xian's sword was growing faster and sharper. On the other hand, even though elegant capture had calmed himself down, he was still helpless against Yi Xian's wretched method of fighting. He'd been constantly waiting for Yi Xian to make a mistake, but Yi Xian just didn't make a mistake. He didn't make a single mistake. Just like that, another 4 hours passed. Yi Xian suddenly dodged backwards and dodged Elegant Kurjan's fatal blow. After he stopped, Elegant Kurjan suddenly said coldly, "Human, if this continues, will you be able to outlast me?" Yi Xian waved the sword in his hand and smiled, "Cut the crap and continue fighting." As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that vanished on the spot. A ray of light tore through the surroundings. Elegant Capture suddenly spoke fiercely when he witnessed this scene, "Attack." As soon as he finished speaking, a few powerful auras suddenly flashed over from afar. In the next moment, an explosion resounded and then Yi Xian was blasted flying. He flew for over 10 kilometers. After Yi Xian stopped moving, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He wiped off the blood from the corner of his mouth, and then he gazed at Elegant Capture. At this moment, 4 formidable demon beasts had appeared by Elegant Capture's side. Yi Xian was quite stunned. A group fight. Elegant Capture stared fixedly at Yi Xian. "Did I say I would fight you in a one-on-one battle?" Yi Xian said, "I'll fucking..." Yi Xian looked at Demon Monarch Zhou Xian. "Demon Monarch, fight me one-on-one." One-on-one. Demon Monarch Zhou Xian was expressionless. "Are you sure?" Yi Xian nodded. Zhou Xian nodded and said, "How about this? I'll let you pass if you can withstand 3 punches from me. If you can't, then you'll have to return to where you came from." 3 punches. Yi Xian blinked. "I won't. Take 3 punches head-on?" He was not stupid. If he took it head-on, he would not even be able to withstand 1 punch. At this moment, Zhou Xian said again, "Since you don't dare to take 3 punches from me, then I'll take 3 sword strikes from you. If I can withstand 3 sword strikes from you, you'll admit defeat. How about that?" Yi Xian's face darkened. "Damn, is this even human? Not to mention 3 sword strikes, I can't kill this fellow even with 30 sword strikes. This fellow doesn't want to fight." Zhou Xian suddenly said coldly, "I can't hit you, but you can't hit me either. Do you want to be ganged up on? Am I right?" "Yi Xian." Zhou Xian glanced coldly at Yi Xian. "I'm not playing with you anymore." With that, he turned and left. Yi Xian was speechless. He finally saw through it. This fellow doesn't want to fight anymore. After a moment, Yi Xian shook his head and left. If the other party didn't want to fight, he couldn't force him to, right? If he angered this fellow and they really ganged up on him, wouldn't he be beaten to death? Soon Yi Xian disappeared at the end of the dense forest in the distance. Somewhere, Zhou Xian looked at the place where Yi Xian disappeared and shook his head. He's seeking his own death. With that, he turned and left. It had to be said that Yi Xian's strength was indeed very strong. However, in the vast Great Desolate Mountain Range, it was really nothing. Wanting to leave the Great Desolate Mountain Range? That was basically impossible. Not to mention Yi Xian, even he could not fight his way out of the Great Desolate Mountain Range. At this moment, a voice sounded from beside Zhou Xian. "My king, that human entered the swamp of Mount Mang." Hearing this, Zhou Xian was stunned and then said softly, "He really knows how to choose a place." Yi Xian came before a swamp. Looking at the swamp in front of him, Yi Xian frowned. This place doesn't look like a good place. At this moment, the swamp in front of him suddenly wriggled. Then the space around him suddenly trembled. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He drew his sword and slashed down. A sword light fell straight down. However, the space in front of him did not move at all. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression sank. The space around him had been sealed. At this moment, the space around him suddenly cracked open. Swamp mud seeped out from these cracks. Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward and slashed down again. This time, a sharp sword hum suddenly rang out. However, the space where the sword landed still did not move at all. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. He sensed his surroundings. There seemed to be some mysterious barrier in the space around him. Yi Xian did not dare to be careless. He knew that not all the demon beasts here relied on their physical bodies. There were some that knew mysterious divine abilities. From a certain perspective, these demon beasts were even more terrifying than those that relied on their physical bodies. At this moment, the swamp mud increased. At this rate, in less than 15 minutes, the space around him would become a swamp space. Yi Xian frowned slightly. The other party wanted to use this method to kill him? As if thinking of something, Yi Xian held his sword and slashed at the swamp mud. This slash did not damage the swamp mud at all. Not only that, but his own sword was covered by the swamp mud and then corroded. Yi Xian was shocked, and the sword in his right hand shook violently. Boom! A sword light shook out and the sword returned to normal. Yi Xian glanced at the swamp mud. What was this thing? Could even corrode his supreme sword. More and more swamp mud appeared in the surroundings. Yi Xian fell silent. If he utilized the Space Dao Law, then he would actually be able to break through this spatial barrier with ease. However, he didn't want to use it, because it wasn't his own strength but the strength of the Space Dao Law. Swordsman had said that he would rely on his own strength to walk out of here. His own strength. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings. A moment later, his sword domain suddenly enveloped the surroundings, and then he suddenly drew his sword and slashed in front of him. Space trembled as his sword slashed down, but it didn't split open. Meanwhile, Yi Xian immediately slashed down again. Just like that, he'd slashed over 100 times towards the same spot in just a few breaths of time. Finally, when Yi Xian's final slash descended, a rift split open in space, and Yi Xian immediately activated Dark Prison before detonating it. Rumble. With him at the center, the space around him suddenly shattered. After the space shattered, Yi Xian issued a command in his heart, and a few hundred dark energy swords appeared around him. Meanwhile, a voice suddenly resounded from the swamp in front of him. Sword domain. How rare. Yi Xian gazed at the swamp. Meanwhile, a man slowly floated up from the swamp. The man's upper body was no different from a human's, but his lower body was like a wolf's. Most importantly, the man was dressed extremely flirtatiously. He had heavy makeup on his face and he even wore a small red flower in his ear. He looked extremely flirtatious. Yi Xian sized him up. Is this fellow half human, half demon? The corners of the man's mouth curled up slightly when he noticed Yi Xian's gaze, and he revealed a charming smile. Do I look good? Yi Xian was speechless. The man sized up Yi Xian and smiled. Human, I heard you want to pass through this mountain range? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The man laughed. His laughter was a little sharp and it was neither a man nor a woman. It was very ear-piercing. After laughing for a while, the man looked at Yi Xian, and his smile became even more charming. Human, I have a way to help you leave this mountain range. Yi Xian said indifferently. What way? The man covered his mouth and smiled. Sleep with me. Yi Xian was speechless. The man looked at Yi Xian and his face blushed. If you sleep with me and make me feel good, I will help you leave this desolate mountain range. I'll help you leave this desolate mountain range. Yi Xian suddenly shook his head. I can't take it anymore. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. A wisp of sword light tore through the air. In the distance, the man's smile suddenly turned cold. He clapped his hands together and this time he directly caught Yi Xian's sword. However, the next moment Yi Xian's sword shook violently. Bang! The man was directly pushed back. At the moment when the man was pushed back, the sword in Yi Xian's hand suddenly disappeared. Instant kill. In the distance, the man's pupils suddenly shrank. He stomped his right foot and his whole body directly sank into the swamp. Bang! The sword light entered the swamp, and the entire swamp shook violently. Swamp mud shot up into the sky. Yi Xian opened his palm and the sword returned to his hand. He looked at the swamp and frowned. He could not feel the man's aura. At this moment Yi Xian suddenly turned around. In front of him an afterimage swept past. Yi Xian drew his sword and slashed. Bang! As the sword fell, the space in front of Yi Xian directly shattered, and an afterimage retreated rapidly. It was the man. The man was pushed back several thousand feet and there was a deep sword mark on his hand. After the man stopped, he glanced at the sword mark on his hand and then he smiled at Yi Xian. What a powerful sword. Yi Xian was about to attack. Suddenly, the man smiled and said, You're Yi Xian, right? Yi Xian was stunned when he heard this. This guy knows that I'm Yi Xian? Chapter 1519. He had to admit that he was a little confused at this moment. How did this guy know his name was Yi Xian? It didn't make sense. One had to know that this place was very far from the fifth dimension. Moreover, this was his first time here. At this time the man smiled. You seem very confused. Yi Xian looked at the man, a little. The man's lips curved. Yi Xian, I heard you have a treasure on you. Yi Xian frowned. Treasure? The man nodded. Yes. Yi Xian smiled. What treasure? The man looked at Yi Xian. You still don't know what treasure it is? Yi Xian shook his head. I have a lot of treasures, I don't know which one you are talking about. The man smiled. Let me remind you. Purple gas. Purple gas. Hearing this, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. You know about purple gas? The man laughed. That wood spirit suddenly broke through. This alarmed many monster kings. Yi Xian shook his head. Let's not talk about purple gas first. Can you tell me how you know my name? The man smiled. Guess. Yi Xian shook his head. Not guessing. As his voice fell, he suddenly disappeared. The space in front of the man was suddenly torn apart. The man's pupils shrank. He wanted to dodge but found that Yi Xian's sword was many times faster than before. He couldn't dodge at all. He could only take it head-on. The man suddenly pointed between his eyebrows. Wolf soul. Bang. A wolf soul suddenly appeared behind the man. This wolf soul howled fiercely and a powerful soul force swept out, forcefully blocking Yi Xian's sword. In the distance, Yi Xian subconsciously wanted to take out the soul-suppressing sword, but he quickly realized that the soul-suppressing sword inside the prison pagoda gradually calmed down. Yi Xian was silent. He suddenly found that as long as he used external objects, ordinary experts were not his opponent. In the distance, the man looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, You really aren't simple. Yi Xian looked at the man. He opened his palm and a wisp of purple gas appeared in his hand. Xiaota's purple aura. The man's eyes instantly narrowed when he saw the purple qi. His eyes flickered with excitement and greed. Yi Xian smiled and said, Tell me, how do you know my name? The man looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, Guess. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared on the spot. A wisp of a cold smile arose on the corners of the man's mouth. He pressed his palms together and suddenly bent down. Soul annihilation. Behind him, the wolf soul suddenly bent down and roared. Rumble. With this roar, the space in front of him was directly destroyed. It was extremely shocking. However, as soon as the space was destroyed, tens of thousands of energy swords were suddenly condensed by Yi Xian. In the next moment, the tens of thousands of energy swords exploded. Rumble. The man was sent flying along with his soul. At the moment he was sent flying, a sword suddenly stabbed into the wolf soul above his head. Soul-subduing sword. Although it wasn't the soul-subduing sword, this sword had an extremely strong restraining effect on the soul. After being stabbed by the sword, the wolf soul was directly annihilated. The man let out an extremely shrill scream. When he landed on the ground, a sword suddenly pressed against his forehead. Yi Xian looked down at the man. I'll ask you one last time. How do you know my name? The man stared at Yi Xian. My father is the demon king of Mount Mang. If you dare touch. Yi Xian suddenly slashed down with his sword. The man's head flew off. The eyes of the man's head that had been sent flying were wide open, filled with disbelief. I haven't finished speaking yet. After killing the man with one strike, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. At that moment, a blood-red thread suddenly flew out of the dead man's body. This thread slowly flew up and finally appeared on his body. Disaster karma thread. Yi Xian said softly, It really is you. With that said, he entered the prison pagoda and went to the 9th level. The door of disaster was still on the 9th level. Yi Xian walked in front of the door of disaster. I got to know the wood spirit and sowed good karma. However, because of this good karma, I will become a juicy piece of meat in the eyes of the demon beasts in the great desolate mountain range. Because to these demon beasts, the temptation of the violet mist was far too great. If these demon beasts want the purple gas, they will definitely come to me. If I kill them, I will attract more karma and bad karma, right? The door of disaster did not speak. Yi Xian said again, You want me to have more bad karma, or rather, you want to use the demon beasts in the great desolate mountain range to kill me, right? The door of disaster still did not respond. Yi Xian continued, The demon beasts must know my name because of you, right? The door of disaster still did not respond. Yi Xian looked at the door of disaster, smiled slightly and turned to leave. The cause of disaster? He was no longer that afraid. As long as Yi Xian did things with a clear conscience. As for other things, as long as he had a clear conscience, why should he care about anything else? After Yi Xian left, the door of disaster suddenly trembled. Outside the prison pagoda, Yi Xian continued forward. Right now he no longer cared about the cause of disaster. Be yourself and have a clear conscience. As for other things, screw them. Not long after, a demon beast suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The demon beast looked at Yi Xian, its eyes filled with ferocity and greed. Human, I heard you have purple gas. Yi Xian raised his hand and slashed. The demon beast's head flew off, blood spurting out. Yi Xian continued forward. Soon Yi Xian reached the end of the swamp. Behind him there were dozens of demon beast corpses. When he was about to walk out of the swamp, a timid voice suddenly sounded from his right. Human. Yi Xian turned to look. Not far to his right there was a small demon beast. The demon beast was shaped like a tiger. Its body was snow white and it had 2 tails. Yi Xian smiled and said, "What are you doing?" This demon beast had been following him for a while. The small demon beast hesitated, then said, "Human, can you give me a bit of purple gas?" "Just a bit." Yi Xian looked at the small demon beast and smiled. "What do you want purple gas for?" The small demon beast said timidly, "My father fought with someone and was seriously injured. If there is no healing item, he won't live." Yi Xian said, "Really?" The small demon beast hurriedly said, "Yes. If you don't believe me, I can take you to see it. Are you willing to go?" Yi Xian smiled, "All right, take me there." The small demon beast was extremely excited and its voice trembled, "Come with me." As it spoke, it turned around and ran towards the distance. Yi Xian followed the small demon beast. No, he followed it to a cave and he saw a comparatively larger demon beast within the cave. At this moment the demon beast was covered in blood. Yi Xian frowned when he saw this scene. This demon beast was heavily injured. The demon beast suddenly sat up when it saw Yi Xian, and then it pulled the small demon beast behind it and stared fixedly at Yi Xian while its eyes were filled with vigilance. "Human." Yi Xian nodded. The demon beast spoke in a low voice. "Human, what are you doing?" Yi Xian smiled and then he opened his palm. A few dozen strands of violet energy floated towards the demon beast. The demon beast instantly trembled when it saw the violet energy. This? Yi Xian pressed down lightly with his right hand, and the violet energy was instantly absorbed by the demon beast. Bang! As soon as the violet energy entered its body, the demon beast instantly emanated a strand of pure spiritual energy, and then the injuries throughout its body started to heal at an extremely swift pace. Yi Xian nodded slightly when he saw this and then he turned around and left. Meanwhile, the demon beast suddenly spoke in a trembling voice. "Wait." Yi Xian turned around to look at the demon beast and the demon beast glanced at Yi Xian. "Thank you." Yi Xian nodded and left the cave. Meanwhile, the small demon beast chased after him, and it gazed at Yi Xian as it spoke softly. "Thank you." Yi Xian smiled. "You're welcome." As if he'd thought of something, he suddenly opened his palm, and then a few dozen strands of violet energy floated out from his palm and entered the small demon beast's head. As soon as the violet energy entered its body, the small demon beast's body instantly trembled because the violet energy was changing its bones and meridians. It could be said that the small demon beast's future achievements were limitless, because the violet energy within Xiao Ta's body had been left behind by the spirit ancestor. A short while later, a strand of aura suddenly emanated from within the small demon beast. It had broken through directly. After it broke through, the small demon beast immediately knelt before Yi Xian and spoke in a trembling voice. "Thank you." Yi Xian smiled. "Take care." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Meanwhile, the small demon beast suddenly said, "Wait a moment." Yi Xian gazed at the small demon beast, and it hesitated for a moment before it said, "I saw many demon beasts looking for you, but you killed them all. Why didn't you kill me and even gave me so much violet energy?" Yi Xian smiled. "Because they came looking for me with the intention of seizing it, but you're different. You came to beg me. Do you understand?" The small demon beast blinked. I don't really understand." Yi Xian roared with laughter. "You'll understand in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, he swiftly vanished into the distance. The small demon beast gazed at Yi Xian's figure from afar, and it seemed to be lost in thought. Xian had arrived at a valley in the distance. Mountains towered into the clouds on both sides of the valley, and they were extremely precipitous. Xian walked slowly. He walked very slowly, thinking. He'd been constantly thinking about his shortcomings throughout this period of time. Actually, so long as one dared to face one's heart, then one would notice that one actually had numerous shortcomings, and once one was able to notice them, one would be able to change them. Humans had to constantly work hard to change themselves. Xian withdrew his thoughts and looked around. He could sense that there were many obscure auras in the surroundings, and these auras had been spying on him for a long time. After a moment of silence, Xian looked into the distance. This was supposed to be a simple trial, but it was different now. But it didn't matter. To him, he had to continue on his path. If gods stood in his way, he'd destroy gods and demons. At this moment, Xian suddenly stopped in his tracks. 100 zhang in front of him stood a demon beast. The demon beast had a strange shape with the body of a bull and the head of a tiger. It had 3 legs and a huge body. The demon beast looked at Xian. Human, leave the violet energy behind and I'll spare your dog life. If you dare to say no. The demon beast's voice suddenly stopped, and Xian had already appeared behind the demon beast. Searchith. Xian continued walking into the distance, and behind him the demon beast suddenly split into 2. Fresh blood splattered all over the ground and it was extremely bloody. At this moment Xian suddenly stopped in his tracks. He lifted his head and saw that the sky had suddenly split open. In the next moment, a powerful coercion swept over from the sky. The coercion felt like the sky and earth were collapsing, and under this coercion Xian was like a lone boat in the middle of the ocean, appearing extremely frail. Below, Xian looked at the sky and took a step forward. His eyes flashed with a hint of hostility. You're begging for death. Boom. A powerful sword intent suddenly soared into the sky, and the entire sky was directly torn apart by this sword intent. The entire great desolate mountains was shocked. At the same time, a powerful sword intent swept out from within Xian's body. This sword intent was like a tidal wave that shook the surrounding space. At the end of the great desolate mountains, a swordsman suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction of Xian. He was slightly stunned at first, then he smiled and said, "You're begging for death. I like it." Chapter 15:20. Seeking Death. Seeking death was a state of mind, a form of resistance and more importantly, a form of momentum. When he first entered the great wilderness, he did not kill all the demonic beasts in front of him. He basically showed mercy. Xian did not bully humans nor did he bully demons. However, who dared to bully him? No way. Inside Xian's body, endless sword intent soared into the sky. These sword intents eventually converged into a torrent, and the powerful pressure in the sky was directly blocked by the sword intent. In fact, this was no longer sword intent but sword momentum. Seeking death with a single thought, turning intent into momentum. Xian did not expect that the momentum he had been pursuing would be manifested in such a manner. If a person had the thought of dying in their heart, their momentum would reach its peak. A middle-aged man suddenly appeared in the sky. He wore a beast robe and had a burly figure. His eyes were scarlet blue, and his body exuded an extremely domineering pressure. Demon Monarch Mount Mang. Among the 10 great demon monarchs, Demon Monarch Mount Mang was ranked 5th. Demon Monarch Mount Mang looked down at Xian. He was somewhat shocked because Xian's sword momentum had actually blocked his momentum. As a demon monarch who commanded millions of demonic beasts, he had a king's aura. In addition, his strength had reached the peak of the eternal realm. Therefore, his momentum was definitely not something ordinary people could resist. However, the human in front of him had resisted it with just his sword momentum. And this human was only at the Tao attainment realm. At this moment, Xian, who was down below, suddenly pulled out his sword and slashed at the sky. Back first. Xian's strike was not an instant kill strike, nor was it the sword drawing technique. It was just a simple strike, but this strike's momentum was like a rainbow, as though it wanted to tear the sky apart. In the sky, a trace of hostility flashed in Demon Monarch Mount Mang's eyes. Human ant. As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward and threw a punch. It was pure physical strength. This punch caused the entire sky to distort. At that moment, Xian's sword arrived. Rumble. In the sky, A beam of sword light suddenly shattered and Yi Xian retreated to the ground. As soon as he landed, the ground under his feet shattered into a huge abyss. As for Demon Monarch Mount Mang, he retreated nearly 1,000 feet. There was an extremely deep sword mark on his right fist and his white bone could be seen. Mount Mang looked down at Yi Xian with cold eyes. "Human, you have angered me." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly dove down from the sky. As soon as he dove down, the space below him directly shattered and transformed into an expanse of pitch black. Below, Yi Xian looked up at the swooping Demon Monarch Mang Mountain as he slowly closed his eyes. Die. A wisp of a savage smile appeared on the corners of Yi Xian's mouth. In the next moment he suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Sword drawing technique. The sword slashed out and the sword light tore through the sky. Rumble. The space where Yi Xian was directly shattered and annihilated. At the same time he was sent flying backward. However, the instant he flew out he stomped his right foot. Explode. In an instant the space in front of him was suddenly enveloped by a dark domain. Right on the heels of that, countless sword beams suddenly exploded in the entire space. Boom boom boom. Boom. Demon Monarch Mount Mang was sent retreating by the explosive force of the sword beams. He retreated thousands of feet away. After stopping, Demon Monarch Mount Mang's expression turned extremely ugly. This was because there were dozens of sword wounds all over his body. Although these sword wounds weren't fatal, they were a disgrace to him. He had actually been injured by a human at the Dao Manifestation Realm. Demon Monarch Mount Mang looked up at the nearby Yi Xian, and his expression turned extremely ferocious. "Damn human you." At this point his voice suddenly stopped because Yi Xian had already charged at him. To Yi Xian, a fight was a fight. What was the point of spouting nonsense? He hated spouting nonsense before a fight. It was already a life and death battle, so what was the point of spouting nonsense? Yi Xian was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Demon Monarch Mount Mang and slashed down. Sword drawing technique. This strike was still as imposing as before. Demon Monarch Mount Mang raised his hand and punched out. Boom. A sword beam shattered as Yi Xian was sent flying thousands of feet away. However, the next moment the sword in his hand vanished. Single strike. In the distance, Demon Monarch Mount Mang raised his right arm to block as a beam of light flashed on it. Boom. Demon Monarch Mount Mang retreated hundreds of feet instantly. Before he could stop, Yi Xian slashed again. The corners of Demon Monarch Mount Mang's mouth suffused a sinister smile. He clenched his right hand and punched. Simple and violent. Boom. Yi Xian was sent flying again, but he charged at Demon Monarch Mount Mang the next moment. This sword was even faster and stronger than before. Demon Monarch Mount Mang suddenly took a step back. He raised his head and widened his eyes. Veins protruded from his forehead as he half-squatted and clenched his fists tightly. A powerful force condensed in his dantian and rapidly gathered on his arms. In the next moment he crossed his arms and held them horizontally. Heaven-destroying seeking boat. Boom. On Demon Monarch Mount Mang's arms, a powerful force erupted like a volcano that had been accumulating for tens of thousands of years. The space in front of him was instantly annihilated, and the powerful force sent Yi Xian flying hundreds of thousands of feet away. However, at the instant Yi Xian was sent flying, countless dark energy swords suddenly appeared in front of Demon Monarch Mount Mang. There were hundreds of thousands of them. In the distance, Yi Xian roared angrily, "Explode!" Boom. The area where Demon Monarch Mount Mang was drowned by the sword beams. Boom. Boom. Space constantly shattered and spread in all directions. This continued for nearly 15 minutes before the world slowly calmed down. At that moment, Yi Xian was already hundreds of thousands of feet away from Demon Monarch Mount Mang. Yi Xian stood with his sword in hand. Blood constantly gushed out from the corner of his mouth. His face in particular was devoid of any color. That exploding sword had consumed too much of his energy. In the distance, Demon Monarch Mount Mang's situation wasn't much better than Yi Xian's. His body was covered in sword wounds and some parts were so mangled that his bones could be seen. His body was very strong, but it couldn't withstand such an explosion. Fortunately, although he was injured, it wasn't fatal. Demon Monarch Mount Mang looked up at the nearby Yi Xian. He suddenly stretched out his right hand and clenched it tightly. Condensing mountain seal. Boom. Hundreds of thousands of feet away, a mountain suddenly collapsed. In the next moment, the mountain condensed into a 10,000-foot-long palm seal. And at that moment, the distant Yi Xian suddenly vanished from his spot. He naturally wouldn't wait for Demon Monarch Mount Mang to unleash his ultimate move. His advantage was speed. He had to expand this advantage. Upon seeing Yi Xian suddenly attack, Demon Monarch Mount Mang's expression changed. He had no choice but to give up on casting the condensing mountain seal because it was too late. In the midst of his thoughts, Yi Xian's sword beam had already slashed out. Demon Monarch Mount Mang retracted his right hand and punched out. This punch caused the space in front of him to turn into a groove. Boom! Yi Xian's sword was blocked by a powerful force. And at that moment, Demon Monarch Mount Mang suddenly punched out with his left hand. This punch went straight for Yi Xian's face. Upon seeing this scene, Yi Xian's pupils constricted. He didn't dare take Demon Monarch Mount Mang's punch head-on. He immediately blocked with his sword. Boom! With a single punch, Yi Xian was sent flying 10,000 feet away. Just as Demon Monarch Mount Mang was about to take advantage of the situation to give chase, his pupils suddenly constricted as he closed his eyes. Boom! A sword beam stabbed into his right eyelid. Demon Monarch Mount Mang retreated more than 100 feet. When he opened his eyes, the sword had returned to Yi Xian's hand. Demon Monarch Mount Mang didn't dare be careless against Yi Xian's fast sword. It should be said that he was somewhat afraid of Yi Xian's fast sword. If Yi Xian's sword was stronger and could break through his defense, he wouldn't dare fight Yi Xian. However, he realized that Yi Xian's sword was becoming stronger. The human in front of him was constantly becoming stronger. With this in mind, Demon Monarch Mount Mang suddenly turned his head. "Have you seen enough?" The moment he said that, laughter suddenly came from afar. "Demon Monarch Mount Mang, it looks like you can't take him down." As the voice faded, a man suddenly appeared behind Demon Monarch Mount Mang. The man wore a loose black robe and his hands were hidden in his wide sleeves. Demon Monarch Guyu. He was also one of the 10 great demon monarchs. He was ranked 4th, just ahead of Demon Monarch Mount Mang. Demon Monarch Mount Mang glanced at Demon Monarch Guyu. "Let's join forces." Demon Monarch Guyu smiled. "Demon Monarch Mount Mang, this human isn't simple." Demon Monarch Mount Mang was expressionless. How is he not simple? Demon Monarch Guyu looked at the distant Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Such a young swordsman has such terrifying combat strength. Tell me, do you think he's an ordinary person?" Just as Demon Monarch Mount Mang was about to speak, Yi Xian suddenly said, "You don't know me?" Demon Monarch Guyu looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Of course I do. Your name is Yi Xian, right?" Yi Xian nodded. "I'm a little curious. How do you know me?" Demon Monarch Guyu smiled. "A mysterious person told us that you have a treasure on you. It's that mysterious purple gas. This purple gas can change a demon beast's bloodline, allowing them to break through their bloodline shackles. That mysterious person was right? Yi Xian wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said, "Who is that mysterious person?" Demon Monarch Guyu shook his head. "I don't know." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "You don't know?" Demon Monarch Guyu smiled. "Why? You don't know yourself?" There was a trace of doubt in Yi Xian's eyes. "Mysterious person? Is it the door of calamity?" Demon Monarch Guyu suddenly said, "Human, give us the purple gas and we will let you pass. What do you think?" Yi Xian looked at Demon Monarch Guyu. "I don't think so." With that said, he pointed his sword at Demon Monarch Guyu. "Both of you come at me together." He knew that he couldn't escape now. Since he couldn't escape, he had to fight. It didn't matter whether he could win or not. What was important was that he couldn't lose. In fact, he was panicking. Demon Monarch Guyu stared at Yi Xian. After a moment he suddenly laughed. "You're relying on that swordsman who came with you, right? I can tell you that he can't save you because he can't even protect himself." Yi Xian blinked. Suddenly he didn't feel so panicked anymore. Chapter 1521. Swordsman. Yi Xian's expression was a little strange. He did not expect these demon kings to look for swordsmen. Yi Xian hesitated and said, "I really don't understand. Isn't your target me? Why are you looking for swordsmen?" Demon King Guyu laughed. "He came with you, didn't he?" Yi Xian blinked. "Are you afraid he will help me?" Demon King Guyu nodded. "Yes. So, just in case, we have to get rid of him first." "Get rid of swordsmen?" Yi Xian's expression became more and more strange. Demon King Guyu looked at Yi Xian. What's with your expression? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, Can I tell the truth? Demon King Guyu laughed. Of course. Yi Xian grinned and gave a thumbs up. Well done. Looking for swordsman? Yi Xian had to admit that he was so happy that his stomach hurt. In this world, not only people liked to think that they were infallible, but so did demons. Demon King Guyu looked at Yi Xian and felt a sense of unease. He turned to look. Could it be that swordsman was very strong? Inside Yi Xian's world prison pagoda, the door of disaster suddenly trembled. Blood lightning flashed around the door as if it was angry. At the end of the great desolate mountain range, swordsman stood in the starry sky, looking into the depths of the starry sky. No one knew what he was thinking. In fact, the reason why he brought Yi Xian around and gave Yi Xian pointers was because of the azure-robed man. As the son of an old friend, he naturally had to help. But after interacting with him, he found that Yi Xian was very much to his liking. Moreover, he suddenly felt a sense of accomplishment from giving pointers to a little guy and watching him grow bit by bit. At this moment, a man suddenly appeared not far from swordsman. The man was dressed in a gray robe, his long hair draped over his shoulders. His hands were behind his back and there was a domineering air about him. Demon King Helion. Ranked second among the 10 great demon kings. Demon King Helion looked at the great desolate mountain range in the distance and laughed. I have seen several powerful swordsmen among the humans, but I have never seen you. Swordsman retracted his gaze and looked towards the depths of the great desolate mountain range. Is something the matter? Demon King Helion looked at Swordsman and said with a smile, Shall we have a spar? Swordsman glanced at Monster King Helion and shook his head. You're not worthy. The expression on Demon King Helian's face froze. The next moment he suddenly laughed out loud. This is the funniest joke I've ever heard in my life. He knew that this swordsman in front of him was not an ordinary person, because he could not sense Swordsman's aura. However, Swordsman's words were a little too arrogant. He wasn't worthy? This was the first time Demon King Helion was looked down upon like this. Demon King Helion turned to face Swordsman and said with a smile, Human swordsman, come, I'll let you slash me 3 times. His words were filled with invincible confidence. Swordsman blinked and turned to look at Demon King Helion. 3 slashes. Demon King Helion nodded. 3 slashes. If you think it's not enough, 5 slashes is fine too. Swordsman shook his head. I don't mean to insult you, but you really aren't worthy of my slash. I hope you have some self-awareness and don't make things difficult for me. Demon King Helion stared at Swordsman and clenched his fists. His expression gradually turned ferocious. I beg you, use your sword. Swordsman slashed. It was a very ordinary slash. The moment Swordsman slashed, Demon King Helion's pupils shrank. He half-squatted and crossed his arms in front of him to block. His body was like a rock, impregnable. The reason why he was so confident was because his body wasn't at the divine realm, but the eternal realm. In the entire Great Desolate Mountain Range, his body could at least be ranked in the top 3. However, Qingqing Yi Family Ancestral Hall. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From this moment on, Yi Xian's position as prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth. The youth had a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi Mansion's elders. Why? At this moment, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral hall. Everyone looked at the voice and saw a little girl standing at the door. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old. Her 2 small hands were tightly holding the hem of her skirt. Her face was sickly pale and looked a little weak. There was even a trace of timidity in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder coldly looked at Yi Ling. This is a family matter. Why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She once again bowed to the elders on both sides. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the family and his life is uncertain. But the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he is crippled is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away from me. At this time the new Prince Yilang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning. The great elder coldly replied, then flog 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi Mansion's guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years. Even now he is fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new Prince Yilang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, young Master Yilang inherits the prince's position. What are you yelling about? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. The right side of Yiling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She only held her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yilang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince I will need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply. Subordinate will go through fire and water for the prince. I will do anything for you. Yilang nodded slightly. Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to see something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Zhou Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this moment Zhou Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Zhang Mu felt dizzy and he stumbled and fell. Yilang did not stop there. He rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yilang suddenly roared, Zhou Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh. Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly. Zhou Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Zhou Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Zhou Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on Zhou Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yilang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yilang. On both sides there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yiling and she was Zhou Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Zhou Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yiling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yiling bowed to everyone in the hall as she asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the Great Elder, but she did not leave. Instead she plucked up her courage and walked into the hall. Once again she bowed to the elders. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he is crippled, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time the new prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years and even now he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, young master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. This subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded. You are very good. After I become the prince I will need 10 guards. From now on you will be my guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded slightly. Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall, do not show mercy, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu did not know what he saw but he suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe and the robe was tattered and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his expression was frighteningly gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his expression turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his expression changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak, when Yi Xian suddenly leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Ping. Zhang Mu's head spun and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there and he rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's expression turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's appearance, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping! Chapter 1522. Old Mang Shan was silent. He knew that Guyu was afraid of that swordsman. In fact, he was afraid of that swordsman as well. If Demon King Helion really died in the hands of swordsman, then swordsman's strength was not something he and Guyu could contend against. However, this human was too arrogant. He was furious. Guyu suddenly said, Mang Shan, think about it. Why did that mysterious person tell us that Yi Xian has a purple aura? It's simple. He wants us to kill Yi Xian. In other words, The other party wants us to fight with Yi Xian until both of us are injured and then reap the benefits. Mang Shan said solemnly, "This matter is not simple." Guyu nodded. "That purple aura is good, but we cannot let others use it." Mang Shan said, "Then what do you think we should do?" Demon King Guyu smiled. "It's simple. Wait for the right opportunity." Mang Shan was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'll listen to you." At this moment Yi Xian suddenly said, "Are you guys still fighting?" Guyu looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Little brother, your strength is amazing. We are not your match. We admit defeat." Yi Xian, Guyu continued, "Little brother, if you want to train yourself you can go to Burial Mountain." Yi Xian frowned. "Burial Mountain?" Guyu nodded. "That place is very suitable for little brother." Yi Xian asked, "What is that place?" Guyu smiled. "Relatively speaking, it is a more dangerous place. It's suitable for little brother." Yi Xian glanced at Guyu. "I think you are quite strong. Are you really not going to join forces with Mang Shan? I can't beat the two of you." Guyu quickly shook his head. "Little brother, you must be joking." Yi Xian said seriously, "I really have no backing." Demon Monarch Guyu nodded. I understand. Yi Xian was speechless. By the side, Demon Monarch Mount Mang said indifferently, "If you want to train yourself, go to Burial Mountain. No humans have ever set foot in that place." Yi Xian looked at Mount Mang. "I killed your son previously." Mount Mang said indifferently, "I have more than 10,000 sons. Which one did you kill?" Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Beside him, Demon King Guyu suddenly said, "Little brother, if you want to go to Burial Mountain, just walk straight ahead. You'll reach Burial Mountain in about 4 hours." With that said, he vanished with Demon Monarch Mang Mountain. Yi Xian was speechless. Damn it, these two fellows actually stopped fighting. After a moment, Yi Xian continued to move forward. His target was Burial Mountain. He knew that Demon King Guyu was up to no good, but this was exactly what he wanted. The main reason he came to the Great Desolate Mountain Range was to train himself. Wherever there was danger, he would go. Not long after Yi Xian disappeared, Demon Monarch Guyu and Mount Mang appeared again. Mount Mang said solemnly, "This guy really went to Burial Mountain." Demon Monarch Guyu said softly, "Where did this guy come from?" Mount Mang shook his head. "I don't know." Demon Monarch Guyu turned his head and looked. "I just tried to contact Demon Monarch Helion, but there was no news at all. Seems that he really died in the hands of that swordsman." Hearing this, Mount Mang's face turned solemn. Demon Monarch Guyu said softly, "That mysterious person." At this point he seemed to have thought of something and did not continue. Mount Mang said solemnly, "That swordsman is the real scary one." "Swordsman?" Demon Monarch Guyu turned his head and looked at the horizon. Then he said softly, "Let's just wait and see." On the other side, Yi Xian slowly walked into the distance. He was deep in thought. He realized that his greatest weakness was that he did not have enough strength in his sword. Although his current sword could break through the defenses of a deity realm body, it was not fatal. Against an expert like Mount Mang, his chances of winning were not particularly high. At most, he had a 40% chance because he could not afford to make a mistake. If he made a mistake, he would die. He no longer had a powerful body. If he was punched, his body would be directly shattered. Therefore, he had to be extremely careful when fighting Mount Mang because Mount Mang could take 100 of his sword strikes. But he could not take a punch from Mount Mang. He had to admit that he really missed his deity realm body. If he still had his deity realm body, he could beat Mount Mang like a sun. No. As though he thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly stopped. If he still had his deity realm body, would his sword Dao still be so strong? The answer was definitely no. Because with his body he would be overly reliant on his body, and his sword Dao would not grow so quickly. With this in mind, Yi Xian could not help but shake his head and smile as he continued forward. He would continue cultivating his body, but the premise was that his sword Dao had to be improved first. His sword Dao was already on the right track because even without a powerful body, Yi Xian was confident that he could face any enemy. Burial Mountain. Yi Xian looked up into the distance as he sped up. He wanted to fight now. A frenzied battle. Yi Xian did not notice that the door of calamity in his prison pagoda suddenly trembled but quickly returned to normal. Somewhere in the cosmos, Moon Yen and company were still constantly traversing the cosmos. However, they had completely lost track of the door of calamity. And now they were far away from the fifth dimension. As for where they were, the three women did not know. The mysterious woman in the lead stopped. She looked into the depths of the cosmos, her face somewhat pale. Fear. She had never felt such fear in all this time. She had seen the terror of the door of calamity. Not to mention Xian, even the three of them might not be able to stop the door of calamity. Was Xian really still alive? She did not dare to think too deeply about this question. Beside her, Tu's expression was extremely unsightly. In fact, she was also afraid, and she was becoming more and more afraid. The door of calamity was too powerful. With Xian's current strength, he could not stop the door of calamity at all. At this moment, Mu Nianyan suddenly said, "He is still alive." Tu and the mysterious woman looked at Mu Nianyan. Mu Nianyan smiled and said, "If he is dead, do you think we can still be alive?" Hearing this, Tu and the mysterious woman immediately came to a realization. If Xian was dead, would the plain-dressed woman not return? They could not sense Xian, but the plain-dressed woman could. If Xian was really dead, the plain-dressed woman would have definitely returned. Since she hadn't returned yet, there was only a single explanation, and it was that Xian was still alive. The mysterious woman and Tu's expressions instantly eased up when they thought up to this point. Meanwhile, Mu Nianyan said, "However, we still have to find him as soon as possible. The misfortune seed has already made its move, and his situation will only worsen. So we must find him as soon as possible, otherwise." She did not continue when she spoke up to this point. The misfortune seed. The three women's faces sank again. The misfortune seed had drawn away the mandate of heaven. Could be said that it was best to kill Xian now. The mysterious woman gazed at Mu Nianyan. How should we find him now? Her mind was filled with thoughts of Xian, and she was unable to think normally. Mu Nianyan fell silent for a moment before she said, "Continue forward and think of a way to contact him. The reason we can't contact him now is probably because we are quite far away from him. We should be able to contact him if we are closer." The mysterious woman nodded. "Right? Let's go." After saying that, she disappeared into the distance. Tu glanced at the mysterious woman with a cold expression. "I really want to kill her." Mu Nianyan shook her head. "Our top priority now is to find him and fight against the misfortune seed." The misfortune seed. Tu's expression gradually turned solemn. Mu Nianyan said softly, "Let's go." After saying that, she turned into a sword light and disappeared into the depths of the starry sky. Tu remained silent for a moment before disappearing into the depths of the starry sky. The great desolate mountain range. Xian walked between the mountain range. Along the way it was strangely peaceful, and he did not see a single demonic beast. The closer he got to the burial mountain, the calmer it became. At first there were sounds of insects and birds chirping, but as he got closer to the burial mountain, those sounds disappeared. Xian knew that the so-called burial mountain was definitely not an ordinary place. Of course, the more dangerous it was, the more excited he was. Right now he was eager to fight. Soon Xian quickened his pace and he got closer and closer to the burial mountain. However, he did not realize that there was a pair of eyes watching him from behind. On the other side of the great desolate mountain range, swordsmen stood quietly in the starry sky. Around him there were some disaster karma threads. These were the disaster karma threads that he had sown when he tried to save Xian. Of course, he did not care at all. These disaster karma threads could not do anything to him. At this moment, the disaster karma threads around him suddenly dimmed. Gradually they disappeared. Seeing this, Swordsman's eyes flashed with astonishment. It disappeared on its own. Swordsman raised his head and looked into the depths of the great desolate mountain range. His gaze landed directly on the disaster gate in Xian's body, and he was slightly displeased. "I am extremely interested in disaster karma. Don't make it disappear for me. Hurry up and bring it back." The disaster gate was speechless. Seeing that there was no movement, Swordsman frowned slightly, and an invisible sword intent directly locked onto the disaster gate. The disaster gate suddenly trembled violently, and it hurriedly hid in a corner, shivering. At the same time, disaster karma threads appeared around Swordsman's body, but there were not many, only a few. Swordsman was still slightly displeased. "It's too little, give me more." The disaster gate hurriedly trembled, and then more than 10 disaster karma threads appeared around Swordsman's body. Seeing this, Swordsman's brows relaxed, and he also retracted his sword intent. Meanwhile, inside Yi Xian's body, the disaster gate was still shivering in a corner. It was a little sullen. When had it ever suffered this kind of grievance? This was too much of a bully. P.S. Previously, a reader said that when I burst out, I would only add 2 more chapters. I don't accept this. I want to slap his face. Today there are 8 chapters. The one who said that I would only add 2 more chapters, come out, give me all your monthly tickets and I will forgive you. Also, if everyone likes the Invincible Sword Domain manga, you can go to the Manon website and search Invincible Sword Domain. Invincible Sword Domain manga. Brother Yang has been drawn. Chapter 1523. After an unknown period of time, Yi Xian finally stopped. There was a huge mountain over 3 kilometers away from him. The mountain towered into the clouds and it emanated a ghastly aura. Yi Xian knew that this was probably Burial Mountain. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings and it was deathly silent. It was slightly unusual. Burial Mountain. Exactly what sort of place is this? Yi Xian pondered for a moment before he walked towards Burial Mountain. The weeds before him were over 10 m tall, and there were no signs of anyone stepping on it. Obviously, no human or demon beast had come here. Yi Xian grew even more cautious. Even though he yearned for battle, he didn't dare underestimate Xianxia in the slightest. In next to no time, Yi Xian arrived halfway up the mountain. It was very peaceful all along the way and he didn't even see a bird. Yi Xian raised his head to look at the peak of Burial Mountain. He pondered for a moment before he continued forward. His expression gradually became solemn because he saw some dried-up corpses in the surroundings. Most of them belonged to demon beasts, but there were humans as well. Yi Xian raised his head to glance at the peak of Burial Mountain. Without a doubt, there was definitely an extraordinary expert at the peak of Burial Mountain. When he thought up to here, Yi Xian sped up. Soon Yi Xian arrived at the top of the mountain. When he arrived at the top of the mountain, his face instantly turned serious. There was an enormous blood-red circle 300 m away from him, and a woman sat cross-legged at the center of the blood-red circle. Her hair was disheveled and her limbs were bound tightly by 4 blood-red chains. Moreover, there was a blood-red sword floating above her, and there was a large blood-red word on the tip of the sword. Sin. Yi Xian frowned slightly. What the hell is that? Right at this moment, the woman suddenly raised her head to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was shocked when he saw her appearance. Her appearance was absolutely drop-dead gorgeous and it was rare in the world. Of course, besides her eyes. Her eyes were empty without eyeballs. At first glance it was somewhat horrifying. Even though she had no eyeballs, Yi Xian was able to sense that she was looking at him. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, "Should we spar? The kind that doesn't go overboard." The woman suddenly roared, "Scram!" Boom. A sound wave flashed through the surroundings. Everywhere it passed, space was obliterated inch by inch. In an instant, the space in an area of over 100 kilometers in front of the woman had been transformed into pitch-black darkness. In the distance, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. He quickly unsheathed his sword and slashed. Sword drawing technique and sword domain. As the sword slashed down, a ray of sword light tore through everything. However, as soon as the sword descended, his entire body seemed to have suffered a heavy blow, and he was instantly blasted back. This time he was blasted a few tens of thousands of meters away. As soon as Yi Xian came to a stop, he spat out several mouthfuls of blood essence. He seemed to have discovered something and he suddenly turned his head to look. Behind him, the layers of space were cracking, and the cracks were rapidly spreading into the distance. In the blink of an eye, the space within 100,000 feet of him had turned into a spider web. Yi Xian blinked and he was extremely astounded in his heart. This woman is so ferocious. Meanwhile, Yi Xian spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood essence in succession, and then he hurriedly sat down cross-legged and started recuperating. If he hadn't utilized the sword domain to suppress that attack just now, then he might have been finished. She's too formidable. She's countless times stronger than that demon king from before. Those 2 demon kings really didn't have any good intentions. Around 2 hours later, Yi Xian felt that his injuries had more or less recovered. He took a deep breath and continued walking towards the peak of Burial Mountain. There wasn't even a trace of fear in his eyes, and there was only excitement. He didn't know when it started, but he felt like being bashed. because every single time he was bashed he would notice that he was able to improve. A person could only grow by ceaselessly forcing himself. It wasn't long before Xian arrived at the peak of the mountain once more. Meanwhile, the woman raised her head to look at Xian again. Xian held his sword in his left hand while he stared fixedly at the woman. "I'm Xian and I seek death. I seek death." The woman suddenly clenched her right hand into a fist and smashed it forward. This punch caused the iron chains on her right hand to tremble violently, and then the space in the surroundings that had been repaired instantly exploded apart. At the instant that the woman punched forward, Xian's pupils constricted abruptly, and then he charged forward swiftly and swiftly drew his sword. His space was directly torn apart wherever his sword descended. However, his expression instantly changed violently as soon as his sword descended. In the next moment, the sword light shattered while his figure was blasted flying. He flew for over 30 kilometers and he just stopped when the space beneath his feet collapsed. However, the sword in his hand suddenly flew forward at the instant that he was blasted flying. Instant death. At the center of the blood-red circle in the distance, the woman suddenly stretched out her palm, and a sword just happened to stab into her palm. However, she didn't move at all. When he witnessed this scene, Xian, who'd stopped in the distance, had a slightly solemn expression in his eyes. That woman had actually resisted his sword with such ease. Right at this moment, the woman suddenly clamped her fingers together to clamp Xian's sword between them, and then she tossed it away. Hiss! A strand of sword light flashed like a thunderclap, and it slashed directly at Xian. This attack was even swifter than Xian's instant death. In the distance, Xian's expression was calm. He slowly closed his eyes. Gradually, the speed of the sword became slower and slower. When the sword arrived in front of him, the speed of the sword had already become extremely slow. He directly reached out and grabbed the sword. He controlled the sword with his intent. This sword was connected to his heart and it could communicate with his intent. Xian put his sword away and gazed at the woman in the distance. Blood was still flowing incessantly from the corners of his mouth. He'd still fallen into a disadvantaged position in the collision from before. The woman stretched out a finger and then she crooked it at Xian. Her provocation was self-evident. Xian wiped off the blood on the corners of his mouth, and then he walked towards the woman. When he arrived over 100 m away from her, he suddenly vanished. In an instant, over a dozen rays of sword light appeared around the woman. The woman slapped her palm down towards him. Bang! In an instant, those rays of sword light were blasted into pieces, and then a figure retreated explosively. It was exactly Xian. As soon as Xian retreated, the woman suddenly clawed at space from afar. The space where Xian resided had suddenly warped, and then a powerful force enveloped Xian and was about to tear Xian into pieces. Xian was shocked and he hurriedly utilized his sword domain to suppress her. At the same time he slashed with his sword. Bang! The space in front of him was blasted into pieces. The woman frowned slightly when her attack failed and she was just about to attack again. Meanwhile, a few tens of thousands of energy swords formed from dark energy suddenly appeared from within the shattered space in front of Xian. In the next moment, they transformed into rays of light that slashed towards the woman. The woman suddenly spread open her right hand when she saw the energy swords slashing towards her, and then she lightly pressed forward. The space in front of her suddenly rippled like water. Rumble! Rumble! The energy swords exploded one after another in front of the woman, but the space in front of her was impregnable, and it wasn't damaged at all. It didn't take long for Xian's energy swords to vanish completely, but the space in front of the woman was still completely undamaged. It was an impregnable defense. Xian's heart sank when he witnessed this scene. I've encountered an expert. Xian didn't give it any further thought. He suddenly stomped his right foot against the ground, and then his figure transformed into a ray of light that slashed towards the woman. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly stretched out her right hand and spun it lightly. Crack! The space in front of her suddenly crisscrossed and split apart, and Xian's expression instantly changed. He hurriedly stopped moving and then he drew his sword and slashed that expansive space apart. Rumble! The space where Xian resided was instantly shattered into pieces while he retreated over 1 kilometer back. However, he just stopped before he charged forward once more, and the ray of his sword tore through everything. The woman was facing Yi Xian in the distance. When Yi Xian arrived in front of her, she suddenly stretched out her hand and clamped down on Yi Xian's sword. But in the next moment, a sword appeared in Yi Xian's left hand, and then he slashed it down towards the woman's head. Dual swords. The woman's expression was calm as she directly clamped down on Yi Xian's sword to block it. Clang. An expanse of sword light exploded apart while Yi Xian was blasted back once more. However, a flying sword suddenly slashed down towards the woman's head while he was retreating. Instant death. The woman suddenly moved around 1.5 back and the sword slashed down in a straight line towards her. In the end it stabbed into the blood-red circle. But in the next moment the blood-red circle trembled violently, and then Yi Xian's sword was blasted flying. It flew over 30 kilometers away. The woman didn't attack again and she just fell silent. In the distance Yi Xian opened his palm, and the unparalleled sword flew into his hand. He frowned as he looked at the unparalleled sword in his hand, because the unparalleled sword had been shattered. Yi Xian gazed at the blood-red circle in the distance and he was slightly surprised. What's that? Meanwhile, the woman suddenly said, "You want to seek death?" Yi Xian gazed at the woman and nodded, "Yes." The woman placed her hands on her knees. "Isn't that simple? Help me escape and I'll kill you." Yi Xian sized her up and said, "You've been trapped." The woman's face remained emotionless. "You don't seem to be blind, right?" Yi Xian was speechless. The woman continued, "I'm trapped here so I'm unable to utilize my full strength. If you want to seek death then you can help me escape." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't do that." The woman said, "You can." Yi Xian blinked. "Why?" The woman said, "You are a swordsman." Yi Xian was puzzled. "What do you mean?" The woman pointed at the sword above her head. "Help me break the array beneath me, then help me take this sword away. I'll be able to escape." Yi Xian glanced at the sword above the woman's head. It was a blood sword as if it was forged from fresh blood. Yi Xian was silent. The woman suddenly said, "How is it?" Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, "Actually, I don't really want to die." The woman, Yi Xian continued, "I feel that your current strength is just right. You can suppress me but you can't kill me, so..." The woman suddenly roared, "Do you think I'm here to play with you? Do you want me to sleep with you?" Rumble. In an instant the entire burial mountain shook as if there was a great earthquake. It was incomparably shocking. Chapter 1524. As the woman roared, the entire burial mountain trembled. Yi Xian was a little apprehensive. This woman's strength was not ordinary. Why were all the women he met so strong? More yin than yang? Right at this moment, the woman in the distance suddenly stood up. Although she had no eyes, Yi Xian could sense that she was staring fixedly at him. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before he said, "I'm here to spar." The woman said, "Didn't you want to die?" Yi Xian nodded. "But I don't really want to die." The woman said angrily, "Then why the f*ck do you want to die?" Yi Xian said seriously, "Seeking death is a kind of attitude." The woman sneered with a hint of mockery in her smile. "Attitude? You want to train yourself but you don't dare to push yourself to the limit. If you can't reach your limit, how can you break through? Didn't your elders tell you that it's easiest to improve yourself in a desperate situation?" Yi Xian was silent. The woman continued, "My current strength is enough to suppress you. But I can't force you to your limit. What's the point of your advancement?" Yi Xian glanced at the woman. "If I let you out, I'm afraid you'll beat me to death." The woman was expressionless. "You want to die but you fear death. You are deceiving yourself, understand?" Yi Xian didn't say anything. He felt that what this woman said made sense. However, he also knew that if he really let this woman out, he might really be beaten to death. Because he did not know how strong this woman was. The woman suddenly asked again, "Afraid?" Yi Xian glanced at the woman. The woman coldly laughed. "Swordsman, a swordsman should have no fear in his heart. Since you have fear in your heart, it proves that your sword Dao is flawed." Yi Xian looked at the woman. "I feel like you're trying to trick me." The woman said coolly, "This kind of trial doesn't have much meaning. If you want to break through and reach a higher level of the sword Dao, you have to force yourself. If you don't force yourself, you won't be able to break through within 100 years. Because the current you has already reached your own shackles. Understand? Xian did not follow the woman's train of thought and asked, "Why are you imprisoned here?" The woman said, "Does it have anything to do with you?" Xian turned around and left. "You're so cocky and you still want me to let you out? Dream on." Meanwhile, the woman suddenly said, "Wait." Xian twisted his butt and continued to move forward. "Who told you to pull?" The woman continued, "Why is such a handsome young man so narrow-minded?" Xian stopped in his tracks and turned to look at the woman. "What did you just say?" The woman said, "Why are you so narrow-minded?" Xian shook his head. "The previous sentence." The woman said, "Such a handsome youth." Xian blinked. "Do you think I'm handsome?" The woman nodded. "In terms of appearance among all the men I've seen, you're in the top. No, you're number one." Xian chuckled. "Miss, I think we have a common topic." The woman slowly sat down and said, "To tell you the truth, I want your help." Xian nodded. "I can see that." The woman hesitated and did not speak. Xian also did not speak. After a moment the woman said, "This sword is called Heavenly Sin. It's the second strongest sword in the Nether River star field. Contains the power of sin. If you obtain this sword..." Xian suddenly shook his head. "Miss, I'm not the kind of person who relies on external objects." Saying so, he raised the sword in his hand. "I, Xian, don't rely on external objects other than my sword." The woman nodded and gave a thumbs up. "Young master is amazing. This little girl admires you." Xian sheathed his sword and said with a smile, "Miss, you're actually very powerful too. Although I didn't use my full strength just now, you couldn't use your full strength either. So we're evenly matched. You're powerful, so am I." The woman suddenly said, "Young master didn't use his full strength?" Xian said seriously, "Of course." The woman's mouth slightly twitched. Damn, this was the first time she met someone who lied through his teeth. Xian said again, "Miss, I'm more curious. Why are you suppressed here?" After a moment of silence, the woman said, "I'm from the Tian family." Xian frowned. "The Tian family?" The woman frowned. "You've never heard of the Tian family?" Xian blinked and shook his head. "I haven't." The woman's expression became a little strange. "Where did this hothead come from?" Xian suddenly said, "Do you know who I am?" The woman shook her head. "I don't." Xian suddenly brought out the door of adversity. When she saw the door of adversity, the woman's expression changed. "What is this?" "Danger." The moment the door of adversity appeared, she smelled the scent of death. Xian patted the door of adversity and smiled. "This is my slave." The door of adversity trembled slightly. Inside the door, blood lightning surged. Xian pressed his right hand on the door of adversity and said with Xianxia, "You better behave yourself. Otherwise, I'll ask my big brother to kill you." Hearing this, the door of adversity suddenly quieted down. Xian looked at the woman and smiled. "Miss, do you know who I am now?" The woman said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" Xian blinked and said, "Have you heard of the realm of adversity?" The woman's expression changed. "You're from the realm of adversity?" Xian quickly nodded. "Yes. You know about the realm of adversity?" The woman said in a deep voice, "It's been recorded in ancient history. However, I don't know much about this place." Xian smiled. "To tell you the truth, I am the young realm master of the realm of adversity." The door of adversity suddenly trembled. Xian glared at the door of adversity and said with Xianxia, "Do you believe that I won't call you big brother right now?" The door of adversity was speechless. The woman faced Xian. After a moment she said, "What are you trying to say?" Xian put away the door of adversity and said with a smile, "Miss, I just want to say that I'm not an ordinary person." The woman was silent for a moment and said, "I can help you reach the next level." Xian narrowed his eyes. "Reach the next level?" The woman nodded. "My current strength has been sealed. With my current strength, I can't force you to your limit. If you can't reach your limit, you won't be able to surpass yourself. I can feel that your sword has reached its limit, be it in terms of strength or speed. If you want to break through again, you will only be able to break through the shackles of your body and reach new heights. Of course, this is very dangerous because you might really die. So let's see if you dare to risk your life." Xian was silent. He knew what the woman meant. The limit between life and death. Right now, be it in terms of strength, speed, or mastery of the sword Dao, he had reached a limit. This limit was the shackles. If he wanted to break through again, it was impossible to do so through simple trials. Only in the desperate situation between life and death could he break through his limit. However, as the woman said, it was only a possibility. He might break through his limit or he might really die. Should he risk it? Yi Xian fell silent. The woman in the distance did not speak either. She was waiting for Yi Xian to make his choice. After a long time, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "Miss, you're right." The woman faced Yi Xian. Yi Xian laughed at himself. "As you said, I said that I want to die, but I'm not really asking for it. I'm actually deceiving myself and others. Moreover, when I faced you just now, your strength did cause a trace of fear in my heart. However, I didn't dare to face the fear in my heart." As he spoke, he looked at the sword in his hand and smiled lightly. "I'm a little overcautious now." The woman said softly, "Have you thought it through?" Yi Xian looked at the woman. "If I save you, I might be tainted with some bad karma." The woman said, "I can't promise you anything. I can only say that I'll bear any karma with you. Of course, the prerequisite is that you're not afraid." Yi Xian laughed. "Like how I'm afraid? I'm irreconcilable with karma. In the past, I always wanted to cause less trouble and taint less karma. But now it seems like it's useless. Since that's the case, then I might as well taint more karma." As he spoke, he walked to the woman. "Miss, I'll save you. Help me." The woman nodded. "Sure." Yi Xian said, "How should I help you?" The woman pointed above her. "Take that sword away." Yi Xian said, "That's all?" The woman nodded. Yi Xian gazed at the blood-red sword. After a short moment of silence, he opened his palm with the intention of controlling it. However, it was useless. Yi Xian furrowed his brows. "This sword was a little interesting. It actually doesn't give me any face." Yi Xian leaped up and arrived in front of the sword, and then he utilized his sword domain to suppress it. Meanwhile, the sword suddenly started trembling violently. In the next moment, a strand of formidable force suddenly surged out from within the sword. Rumble. Yi Xian was blasted 300 m away. Yi Xian was quite shocked. "Is that sword that formidable?" Meanwhile, the woman spoke abruptly, "It isn't the sword that's formidable. If it was just a sword, then it wouldn't be a match for you at all. It's the formation beneath me that's formidable." Yi Xian gazed at the blood-red circle beneath her. It had suddenly been activated, and the surroundings were filled with strange blood-red energy. The woman said, "You have to break this spirit-devouring blood formation." Yi Xian said solemnly, "How can I break it?" The woman said, "Think of a way. Think of a way." Yi Xian was speechless. "You're so powerful, yet you can't break it. How can I break it?" As if he had thought of something, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly lit up, and he took out the door of adversity. Yi Xian sneered. There would definitely be bad karma if he saved this woman, and the door of adversity was the culprit. Since that's the case, why not let it save her? In the future, I'll let this door take the blame. If there's no blame, then I'll let it take the blame. Yi Xian placed the door of adversity in front of the woman, and then said, "Break this stupid circle for me." The door of adversity didn't move. Yi Xian transmitted his Xian energy. "Hurry up and break it, or I'll ask my big brother to kill you." The door of adversity. P.S. Thank you to all the readers for your tips and votes yesterday, especially the sect leader's tip of 1 fries. Thank you for your tips and votes. I'm going to get my precious sword. Chapter 1525. The door of adversity trembled slightly. Within the door of adversity, countless bolts of blood-colored lightning flashed and tore. It was obvious that it was enraged. Damn it, it had never been bullied like this before. Yi Xian could sense the door of adversity's anger, but he did not care. He patted the door of adversity lightly and transmitted his voice using celestial qi. "I'll give you 3 breaths. If you don't break this blood formation in 3 breaths, I'll call my big brother. I'll immediately call my big brother to come and kill it." The door of adversity did not respond. The door of adversity still did not respond. Yi Xian opened his palm and a ray of sword light appeared in his hand. Just as he was about to call for help, the door of adversity suddenly floated in front of the woman, and it smashed into the blood circle. Boom! In an instant, the blood circle shook violently and then collapsed. However, countless blood-colored runes appeared and surged into the blood sword above the woman's head. The blood sword shook violently, and in an instant, the entire sky above Burial Mountain turned into a sea of blood. The sword stood in the sea of blood, and the sea of blood around it surged. It was as if doomsday had arrived. It was extremely frightening. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression became solemn. The power contained within the sword made his heart palpitate. However, was this sword going to go against the door of adversity? At this moment, the sword suddenly fell from the sky and slashed at the door of adversity. Seeing this, Yi Xian blinked. Good lord, this sword was really going to destroy the door of adversity. It had guts. Below, the door of adversity suddenly trembled. It was angry. It was one thing to be bullied by that swordsman. After all, they really could not win. However, what kind of trash was this broken sword? How dare it bully it? The door of adversity suddenly turned into a ray of blood light and shot into the sky. It directly collided with the blood sword. Boom! The blood sword directly exploded and turned into nothingness. At the same time, the sea of blood in the sky disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, the woman slowly clenched her right hand. Her heart was filled with a deep fear. Yi Xian glanced at the door of adversity. This door of adversity was really fierce. Apart from the three swords, there was probably no one who could match up to him. Even if Nian Nian and Tu joined forces, they still couldn't resist the calamity it emitted. Unfortunately, this guy was unlucky to meet that swordsman. Meanwhile, the door of misfortune suddenly returned to Yi Xian's body. Naturally, it did not dare to leave. Because the swordsman was not far away, and there were two sword auras within its body. It was afraid that if it ran, it would lose its life immediately. All it could do now was wait for the swordsman to leave. Now it could only lay low. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly said, "Thank you." Yi Xian looked at the woman. "How should I address you, miss?" The woman said, "Pull the gentleman. Save the husband." Yi Xian nodded. "Miss Wanjun, can we start now?" Lu Jun said, "Wait a moment. Let me recover." As she spoke, she sat cross-legged on the ground and started to heal her injuries. Yi Xian suddenly opened his palm, and some violet energy surged towards Pull the gentleman. Pull the gentleman was slightly surprised when she saw the violet energy, and she said, "This violet energy is too precious. However, since it's a token of goodwill, I won't hold back. Thank you." As she spoke, she directly absorbed the violet energy. Yi Xian was speechless. "I've met my match." A short while later, Pull the gentleman had more or less recovered. She stood up and suddenly clenched her fists tightly. In an instant, the chains in her hands collapsed. Pull the gentleman took a deep breath, and then she slowly closed her eyes. After a very long time, she opened her eyes again. Her eye sockets were still pitch black, and they looked extremely horrifying. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he said, "Miss Pull the gentleman, can't you reconstruct your eyes?" Pull the gentleman's expression suddenly became ferocious. "My eyes are in the hands of the Tian family, and I'm going to take them back with my own two hands." Yi Xian glanced at Pull the gentleman. He knew that Pull the gentleman definitely had a blood feud with him. However, that wasn't something that he wanted to care about. Right now, he only wanted to break through his limits. Pull the gentleman suddenly turned to Yi Xian. "Are you ready?" Yi Xian said in a low voice, "I'm ready." He hadn't even finished speaking when Pull the gentleman suddenly attacked. She moved like lightning, and her finger touched the space between Yi Xian's eyebrows. Yi Xian hadn't expected Pull the gentleman to attack so suddenly. He was caught off guard and he was horrified. It was too late to dodge, but he could only forcefully dodge. However, it was still a little too late. Pull the gentleman's finger touched the space between his eyebrows. Boom! In an instant, Yi Xian's body collapsed, and his soul retreated hundreds of kilometers. In the process, his soul started to burn. At this moment, the soul-suppressing sword suddenly transformed into a sword light and fused with his soul. Boom! Yi Xian's burning soul immediately calmed down. After he stopped, Yi Xian clenched his fists tightly and his mind went blank. If it wasn't for the soul-suppressing sword, he would have been instantly killed. Pull the gentleman appeared in front of Yi Xian. "Do you understand what it means to be between life and death?" Yi Xian nodded. "I understand. Between life and death." Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. That moment just now was the closest he'd ever been to death in his life, and at that moment he was afraid. Afraid of death. In this world, how many people could be unafraid of death? Originally, he thought that he wasn't afraid of death, but in reality he still felt fear in his heart when he really faced death. Xian laughed at himself. To think that he had asked for death. Wanted to die. A person who was afraid of death actually wanted to die. Now that he thought about it, it was really ridiculous. Pull the gentleman didn't say anything else. She knew that Xian must have a lot of thoughts going through his mind right now. The feeling of being between life and death far surpassed any kind of bitter cultivation. At this moment, Xian suddenly sat cross-legged on the ground and began to reconstruct his body. This time he used his violet energy to reconstruct his body because it was faster. Around 2 hours later, Xian's body had recovered. Xian shook his head and smiled as he gazed at his reconstructed body. His current body was too fragile. Meanwhile, Pull the gentleman suddenly said, "Shall we continue?" Xian was about to nod when Pull the gentleman suddenly attacked. This time it was even faster than before. Fortunately, Xian was mentally prepared this time, so he'd already retreated the moment Pull the gentleman attacked. However, Pull the gentleman's finger pierced through space and tapped the center of his forehead. Bang! Xian's body collapsed once more, and his soul retreated explosively. This time he retreated for over 30 kilometers. Moreover, his soul had become extremely illusory, as if it would vanish at any moment. Actually, if it wasn't for the soul-quelling sword, his soul really would have vanished. Pull the gentleman walked towards Xian. "You can't do it more than 3 times. If you do it again, that sword won't be able to protect your soul." She stopped as she spoke. "Do you dare to continue?" "Do I dare to continue?" These words struck the heart. Xian took a deep breath. "Come." He sat down cross-legged on the ground and continued to reconstruct his body. Pull the gentleman stood on the spot in silence. 2 hours later, Xian's body had recovered. Xian stood up and looked at Pull the gentleman. Pull the gentleman was about to speak when Xian suddenly stabbed with his sword. Instant kill. Never speak when you're fighting. A lesson learned in blood. This sword went straight for the space between Yanjun's eyebrows. However, as soon as he thrust his sword out, it was caught between 2 of Yanjun's fingers. Almost at the same time, the space where Xian was suddenly split open. However, Xian had already reappeared hundreds of feet away. To be more precise, he'd retreated the moment he'd attacked. That was why Pull the gentleman's finger hadn't struck him. Pull the gentleman held Xian's sword and faced the gentleman. Xian said, "It seems that having your body shattered twice has taught you a lot." Xian said in a low voice, "Please enlighten me, Miss Pull Jun." Pull the gentleman walked towards Xian. "What's the fastest?" Xian said, "The heart." Pull the gentleman nodded. "That's right. When we fight, we can't rely on our instincts alone because some people's speed surpasses our instincts by several times, just like me and the gentleman from before. My speed surpasses our instincts, which is why you couldn't dodge my finger. And this time, the reason he was able to dodge it was because he had already anticipated that I would make a move. So, he had already retreated before I even made a move." Xian frowned. "Prediction." Pull the gentleman shook her head. "Not just prediction but also mental calculation." Xian was puzzled. "Mental calculation?" Pull the gentleman nodded. "Fighting is like playing chess. Every move is like placing a chess piece. When a chess master plays, he's already calculated the possibilities of the next few dozen or even hundreds of moves before placing a chess piece. This is called mental calculation. When you attack with your sword, you shouldn't rigidly adhere to the sword technique. You should think of more possibilities. Just like just now, when you attacked with your sword, you chose to retreat immediately and avoided my fatal blow. This means that you've already entered the realm of the heart of the sword." Hearing this, Xian suddenly saw the light. At this moment he recalled what swordsman had said to him, "Where the heart goes, the sword goes." What was speed? In fact, the pinnacle of speed was prediction. As for prediction, this was a very simple concept. Of course, he also understood that if he did not increase his speed to the limit, he had no right to predict. Just like when he fought Pull Jun, if he did not increase his speed to the limit, it would be useless even if he thought of how Pull Jun would attack. Thinking was not as fast as the other person. Pull Jun suddenly said, "We martial artists call it mental calculation while you swordsmen should call it the heart of the sword. Using the heart to control the sword, using the heart to calculate the sword, if you add the sword technique just now to the heart of the sword, it will become even more terrifying." Xian said solemnly, Is the heart of the sword also divided into realms? Jun nodded. Yes. It's like when people play chess, some can predict 10 moves after placing a chess piece, while others can predict 100 moves. Simply put, there are 3 realms, namely the initial realm, the great achievement realm, and the pinnacle realm. Xian said softly, I'm now considered to be at the initial realm. Jun nodded. Yes. But it's a little special. Xian was puzzled. Why do you say that? Jun said, because I'm only at the Dao realm. In fact, she was also a little shocked. Xian was at the Dao realm while she was at the peak of the eternal realm. Moreover, she could advance at any time if she wanted to. Strictly speaking, she was 3 major realms higher than Xian. However, when facing Xian, she still did not dare to underestimate him, especially now. As if thinking of something, she suddenly looked at him. Do you want to continue? Xian did not speak but directly retreated 100 feet. As soon as he retreated, the space in front of him directly cracked. Xian glanced at Jun, thinking that it was a close call. If he had answered this woman's question, it would have been over. He suddenly realized that fighting could be done like this. Jun was about to speak. At this moment, the space in the sky suddenly trembled, followed by a huge space vortex appearing in the sky. Jun suddenly looked up, her face gradually turning cold. Let's go first. Xian hesitated, then asked, Did someone from the Tian family come? Jun nodded. Xian smiled awkwardly. It's not convenient for me to participate. Jun said, Let's go. Xian turned to leave, but after taking 2 steps he suddenly stopped. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly walked to Jun, then said, Miss Jun, don't be afraid. I am the Misfortune Realm's young master, and this matter will be handled by the Misfortune Realm. If the Tian family does not give face to the Misfortune Realm, then the Misfortune Realm will be destroyed. Inside the prison pagoda, the Misfortune Gate suddenly trembled, almost going berserk. Chapter 1526. The Disaster Cause. Xian had been thinking about a problem. He had the disaster body and the disaster cause. Since the disaster cause was causing trouble for him every day, why didn't he cause some trouble for the disaster cause? Moreover, even if he didn't take the initiative to cause trouble, wouldn't there be trouble? Definitely not. No matter what, the cause of misfortune would find him. There was no point in running away. Since there was no point in running away, he might as well take the initiative to cause trouble and let the door of disaster take the blame. At most he would perish together. Hearing Xian's words, Jun looked at Xian. Are you sure? Xian smiled. Miss Jun, do I look like I'm joking? Jun said softly, This is my business. Xian looked at the sky. From now on, your business is my business. Whoever bullies you is bullying me. Xian bullying my disaster realm. Whoever dares to bully my disaster realm will be killed no matter how far away you are. Jun, the door of disaster. As the vortex appeared in the sky, the entire Great Barren Mountain range was shocked. Countless monsters raised their heads and looked in the direction of Burial Mountain. At this moment, a fiery red flag suddenly flew out from the black vortex. On the fiery red flag there was a huge word, Tian. As the flag floated out, a voice came from the spatial vortex. The Tian family is handling matters. Those who are not involved, please leave. The Tian family. As the voice sounded, the entire Great Barren Mountain range shook. In an instant, the countless demon beasts around Burial Mountain fled in all directions like birds startled by the mere twang of a bow. Xian looked around and frowned. This Tian family was so arrogant. At this moment, Jun suddenly said, It's not too late to leave now. Just as Xian was about to speak, a young man walked out from the sky. The young man wore a brocade robe and held a folding fan in his hand. At the end of the folding fan was a jade pendant. After the young man appeared, he looked around and smiled. Great Barren Mountain Range. As he spoke, he looked down at Jun. Cousin, how have you been? Cousin. Xian's expression was a little strange. This was a family. Family infighting? Xian thought of the Yi family of Qingcheng. It seemed that any family would have internal strife. Jun turned to the young man. Tianqiu, you're alone? The man called Tianqiu laughed and said, Cousin, am I that weak in your eyes? Jun was expressionless. Don't you know what kind of trash you are? The smile on Tianqiu's face gradually darkened when he heard this. He seemed to have thought of something and suddenly looked at Yi Xian, who was standing next to Wan Jun. Are you here to rescue my cousin? Yi Xian nodded. It's me. Tianqiu closed his fan and smiled. I can tell you that no matter who it is, no matter what background he has, the Tian family will take his head. Inside the prison pagoda, the door of disaster suddenly trembled. No one knew what it meant. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, I'm from the misfortune world. Can you give my misfortune world some face? Disaster realm? Tianqiu shook his head and smiled. What kind of rubbish place is that? I've never heard of it. Yi Xian blinked. You've never heard of the misfortune world? Tianqiu smiled. Is the misfortune world famous? Yi Xian turned to look at Wan Jun. Wan Jun said indifferently, his rank is too low. He can't come into contact with the core things of the family. His rank is too low. Yi Xian was speechless. This girl's words were too hurtful. Because Wan Jun had said it very loudly and intentionally for Tianqiu to hear. The smile on Tianqiu's face gradually darkened when he heard Wan Jun's words. He didn't dare to provoke Wan Jun. Instead he looked at Yi Xian. Do you think you can protect the misfortune world? Yi Xian nodded hurriedly. My misfortune world is invincible. The door of disaster was speechless. Invincible. Tianqiu laughed extremely loudly. Invincible? That's the funniest joke I've ever heard. Yi Xian clenched his fists, appearing very angry. How dare you humiliate my misfortune world? Tianqiu looked down at Yi Xian and sneered. Humiliate the misfortune world? What kind of rubbish place is the misfortune world? Is it worthy of being humiliated by the Tian family? In front of the Tian family, the misfortune world isn't even comparable to an ant. At this moment, a bloody light suddenly flew out from Yi Xian's body. Boom. Before Tianqiu could react, he was directly hit by a bloody door. In an instant, Tianqiu's soul was destroyed. Not even a piece of him was left. The one who attacked was the door of disaster. Seeing the door of disaster attack, Wan Jun's expression gradually turned serious. No one knew what she was thinking. Yi Xian glanced at the door of disaster. Damn, he realized that this guy might be many times more powerful than he imagined. That young man was at least in the eternal realm, but he was instantly killed. It could be said that apart from the three swords, no one could stop this broken door. Should he be more friendly when facing this door in the future? In the sky, the door of disaster trembled slightly. Lightning flashed around it. Anger. It was very angry. It was fine if it was bullied by that swordsman. What kind of trash dared to insult the misfortune world? Did it really think that the misfortune world was easy to bully? At this moment, on the other side of the great desolate mountain range, swordsman suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction of the door of disaster. As the swordsman looked, the door of disaster in the sky suddenly turned into a streak of bloody light and entered Yi Xian's body like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. Yi Xian and Wan Jun were dumbfounded. On the 9th floor, the door of disaster hid in a corner and shivered. At this moment, Lil Tower slipped into the 9th floor. Lil Tower flew in front of the door of wretched disaster and hopped around. Lil Air, I said before that you would recognize me as your father. Have you considered it? If you don't want to be my son, then recognize me as your grandfather. The door of disaster. Hearing Xiao Ta's words, Yi Xian was speechless. This Xiao Ta would be beaten up one day. Beside Yi Xian, Wan Jun suddenly said, things may have gotten a little serious. Yi Xian said, it was killed by that door. Wan Jun turned to look at Yi Xian. Isn't that door yours? Yi Xian said, it's mine. However, one should take responsibility for his actions. It will solve itself. Wan Jun hesitated, then said, can we do that? Yi Xian nodded, yes. Wan Jun gave a thumbs up, impressive. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, a powerful aura suddenly surged out from the spatial vortex in the sky. Yi Xian looked up, his left hand tightly gripping the sword in his hand. Wan Jun said softly, a decent one has arrived. As soon as she finished speaking, an old man walked out from the spatial vortex. The old man wore a simple gray robe and held a sheathed long sword in his hand. A swordsman. Yi Xian's eyes lit up. What he wanted the most was to fight a swordsman. Wan Jun looked at the old man. Third uncle, I didn't expect you to come this time. The old man's expression was calm. Isn't it better to stay here and wait for time to run out? Jun said fiercely, I'm not convinced. The old man shook his head. If you're not convinced, then die. Jun said with a smile, bring it on. He smiled and said, then come. At this moment the old man suddenly shook his head. Let's put this aside for now. As he said that, his gaze fell on Xian. Did you kill Xianxia? Then his gaze fell on Xian. Did you kill Xianxia? Xian shook his head. No. The old man frowned. You dare to do it but don't dare to admit it? Xian said, I really didn't kill him. The old man looked at Jun and Jun said calmly, I didn't kill him either. The old man looked at Xian. If you didn't kill him then you let Jun go, right? Xian nodded. The old man stared at Xian. Who gave you the guts to meddle in my family's affairs? Xian pointed at the old man. I want to save him, so I did. You're not convinced? Come and hit me then. Jun was speechless. The old man narrowed his eyes. I've never seen such an arrogant person. Looks like he has quite the backing. Xian said angrily, I'm from the disaster realm. Inside the prison pagoda the disaster realm trembled slightly. If it wasn't for that swordsman, it would have smashed Xian into meat paste. Damn, why did they have to put all the blame on the disaster realm? In the sky the old man frowned slightly. Disaster realm. As he said that he looked at Xian. You think you can be so arrogant just because you're in the disaster realm? As soon as he said that he suddenly pointed with his finger, and a sword light slashed down from the sky. Below Xian suddenly pulled out his sword. Slash. A ray of sword light shot up into the sky. In the sky the old man's sword light was directly slashed into pieces, and then the space in front of the old man was directly torn apart. Seeing this scene the old man was shocked. This young man's sword was so sharp. Not daring to think too much the old man suddenly pulled out his sword and stabbed. It was a tit for tat. Boom. A ray of sword light suddenly exploded in front of the old man, and the old man retreated several tens of feet, but he did not stop and a sword stabbed at him again. The old man blocked with his sword. Boom. The old man retreated nearly 100 feet again, and as soon as the space in front of him was torn apart, thousands of dark energy swords appeared, and then these dark energy swords directly flew towards the old man. The old man's pupils constricted, and then he swung his sword, causing an expanse of sword light to shoot out like a waterfall. Bang! 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 In an instant, countless rays of sword light exploded throughout the sky, and then the entire sky was torn into countless pieces. In the distance Xian was just about to attack again when the spatial vortex in the distance suddenly trembled violently, and then numerous formidable auras surged out. Xian was even more excited when he witnessed this scene. On the other hand, Jun's expression changed and she immediately appeared by Xian's side and grabbed Xian's arm. Let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she brought Xian with her as she flew into the sky. In the sky, Xian hurriedly said, I'm not leaving, I can still fight. Jun said angrily, fight my ass. Someone above the eternal realm has arrived. And there's more than one. Xian was stunned and then he said, it's fine, I can still fight. Jun glared angrily at Xian. There's someone more formidable than me and there's more than one of them. Xian blinked. Don't be afraid, I'm from the misfortune world. I'm the young master of the misfortune world. Meanwhile, an icy cold voice suddenly resounded. Can you be a little more shameless? Xian was stunned when he heard this. Who's speaking? It didn't take long for Xian's expression to change. It's the door of misfortune. Damn it, this fellow's been angered to the point of speaking. P.S. Please give me tickets. Chapter 1527. To be frank, Xian was a little shocked. This door of disaster actually spoke. Just as he was about to study it, Jun brought him and disappeared into the horizon. As for the old man beside him, he didn't stop them. Because he was afraid of death. If it was just Xian, he wouldn't be able to kill him. However, with Jun he had a chance. He didn't dare to take the risk. Not long after they disappeared, two people suddenly walked out from the whirlpool, a man and a woman. Seeing both of them, the old man's face suddenly changed. He quickly walked in front of them and respectfully greeted, Sage, Heavenly Mother. Sage. Heavenly Mother. These two's position in the Tian family is only second to the Tian family's master and master. Sage looked into the distance. Who was that young man just now? The old man said in a deep voice, I don't know who he is. However, he claimed to be from the disaster realm. Disaster realm. Sage and Heavenly Mother looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with deep meaning. The old man hesitated for a bit before saying, Sage, Heavenly Mother, why are you both here? Sage looked at the old man. This matter isn't something you can intervene in. Go back. That old man didn't dare to ask more. He respectfully bowed and retreated. Sage looked into the distance and whispered, What do you think? Heavenly Mother's face was expressionless. Kill him. Sage shook his head. Don't underestimate him. Master said that this man is related to the rise and fall of our Tian family. To be able to affect our Tian family's rise and fall, he's definitely not an ordinary person. Heavenly Mother looked at Sage. He saved Wanjun. This means that he's already on the same side as Wanjun. If we don't kill him, should we rope him in? If we rope him in, our Tian family will be in chaos. Sage sighed in a low voice. Wanjun and the Tian family's master have a blood feud. To stand on Wanjun's side, it means the Tian family will be in chaos. Sage suddenly said, Is he really from the disaster realm? Heavenly Mother shook her head. Impossible. Sage asked, Why do you say that? Heavenly Mother looked into the distance. Didn't you already see it? Sage smiled. Disaster body. The Heavenly Mother nodded. If he really came from the disaster realm, how could he be a person with a disaster body? Of course, he might really be from the disaster realm, but he definitely escaped. As she spoke, she looked into the distant horizon. No matter what, he must die, and so must Lu Jun. The sage said in a deep voice, We can kill that man, but Lan Jun, the celestial master, will not let us kill her. The Heavenly Mother shook her head. Leaving her alive will be a scourge. Right now she must hate the clan to the core, and she is a genius. If we allow her to continue growing, she will definitely become a great threat in the future. The sage said softly, Heavenly Master, we have no choice but to be apprehensive. The Heavenly Mother fell silent. Celestial Master's position in the Tian family was very influential. It could be said that even the Tian family's Heavenly Master had to give her face. If it wasn't for her, Baijun wouldn't have survived until now. After a moment, Heavenly Mother said softly, Act first and report later. The sage was still somewhat hesitant. At this time, a young man suddenly appeared. He wore a white robe and his hands were hidden in his sleeves. He looked gentle and quiet. Celestial Imperial Court. The Tian family's young master. Tian Ke looked at the sage and the Heavenly Mother, smiled and said, Father said that he will deal with the Celestial Master. The sage said, That person can affect the rise and fall of my Tian family. Tian Ke smiled and said, He is already standing on my cousin's side. The sage didn't speak anymore. He knew that if he didn't kill Baijun and that young man, the Tian family would really be in chaos. Thinking to this point, the sage said softly, Then kill them. As his voice fell, he suddenly took a step forward, and with a light stroke of his finger, the space in front of him was directly broken. Millions of miles away, Baijun suddenly stopped. Qingqing Yi Family Ancestral Temple. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From this moment on, Yi Xian's position as prince will be removed, and Yi Lang will inherit. The one who spoke was an old man wearing a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man, and the young man had a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. And on both sides were the Yi family's elders. Why? At this time, a somewhat timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral temple. Everyone looked over and saw a little girl standing at the door. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old, and her two small hands were tightly grasping the hem of her skirt. Her face was sickly pale and she looked a little weak, and there was a trace of timidity in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's blood sister. This time, when she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder coldly looked at Yi Ling. This is a family matter, why are you interrupting? Leave. Yiling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral temple. Once again she bowed to the elders. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan Hill. He is fighting for the family and his life is uncertain. But now the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time the new Prince Yilang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder coldly replied, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi family's guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years and even now he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new Prince Yilang, and he knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, young Master Yilang inherits the title of prince and it's everyone's wish. What are you yelling about? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded and the right side of Yiling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry and only held her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and smiled, what's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yilang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the prince I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on you'll be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed deeply. I'll go through fire and water for the prince and I'll do anything for you. Yilang nodded, drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang and when he saw the killing intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this time Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was dressed in a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Zhou Xian who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this time Zhou Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu's head spun and he stumbled and fell. Yilang did not stop there and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yilang suddenly roared, Zhou Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yilang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, young Master Yilang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded and the right side of Yiling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry and only covered her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and smiled, what's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yilang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the prince I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and quickly bowed deeply. I'll go through fire and water for the prince and I'll do anything for you. Yilang nodded, drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang and when he saw the murderous intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment Zhang Mu saw something and suddenly stopped. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe and the robe was tattered and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yilang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder squinted his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. Yilang did not stop there and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yilang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping! Chapter 1528. Within the spatial crack, the Saint Monarch stared at the phantom, his heart still on guard. Because even now he still couldn't feel the reality of this phantom. Logically speaking, this was basically impossible. One has to know that his current strength was already at the peak of the Nether River star field. At this moment, the phantom spoke again. "You can't kill him, but you can destroy his state of mind. As long as you go in and force the person behind him to make a move, his state of mind of the sword will collapse, and he will also disappoint the person behind him. Only when that person leaves will he possibly die." At the side, Tian Kai shook his head and smiled. "We can't kill him? Are you looking down on my Tian family?" The phantom suddenly slapped out. Pop! A resounding slap resounded, and immediately after, Tian Kai's entire body was directly sent flying, and he directly disappeared. He didn't die, just flew out of sight. Seeing this scene, the Saint Monarch and the Heavenly Mother's expression suddenly changed. At this moment, both of their hearts were incomparably shocked, because both of them actually couldn't see how the phantom attacked. At this moment, the phantom coldly said, "Looking down on your Tian family? What kind of trash is the Tian family? Are you even worthy of my respect?" The Saint Monarch stared at the phantom. "Who the hell are you?" The phantom looked at the Saint Monarch. "Don't care who I am as long as you know one thing about Dao Yi, and that is that my goal is the same as yours, and that is to kill him." The Saint Monarch solemnly said, "With your strength, isn't it a simple matter to kill him?" Hearing this, the phantom suddenly flew into a rage. "Do you know how many people he has backing? This shameless person has backing everywhere. I'm really King convinced. I finally managed to get rid of that woman, and then another swordsman appeared. I'm really pissed off." Thinking of this, she felt somewhat sullen. Originally, she was about to complete the mission, but she didn't expect to encounter that swordsman. She was just passing by. Besides those 3 swordsmen, she could walk sideways with anyone she met. But she just had to encounter one of those 3 swordsmen. This was bloody bad luck. The Saint Monarch solemnly said, "Is his backing very strong?" The phantom's emotions slowly calmed down. She softly said, "Don't be afraid. It's just one person. Your Tian family can handle it." The sage took a glance at the phantom but didn't say anything. The phantom said again, "If you don't go in and kill him now, believe me, when he comes out, the 2 of you won't be able to do anything to him. This person now seems to be on steroids. He just wants to fight, and he's only a step away from the common sword realm. No, only half a step. Once he reached the mortal sword realm, realms would no longer have much meaning to him. Also, the woman who went in with him has an ulterior motive. She brought him in on purpose. I don't know what her motive is, but it's definitely not a good thing for you. Besides, there's a law of the universe inside. Don't tell me you're not tempted?" After the sage went silent for a moment, he said, "Your Excellency, this is a forbidden area for humans." Once you enter this place, your cultivation will be sealed. The phantom said, once they obtain the universal law, they will be able to use it to seal your cultivation when they come out, and their cultivation will not be affected at all. Hearing this, the sage's complexion immediately changed. How much hatred does Wan Jun have for the Tian family? Could be said to be a blood feud. If Wan Jun were to obtain the universal law, there was no doubt that she would directly slaughter the Tian family. Heavenly Mother suddenly said, throughout history, it's unknown how many experts have entered this forbidden area for humans. Those who are several times stronger than her haven't obtained the universal law. Why is your excellency so sure that she can obtain the universal law? The phantom said, she can't obtain it but he might. Heavenly Mother frowned. Why? The phantom said with some anger, because his big brother is awesome. Heavenly Mother, the phantom said again, you still have the chance to kill the two of them. As for the problem of coming out, you don't have to worry. If you kill them, I will naturally help you out. Of course, whether you go or not, it's up to you. After saying that, she directly disappeared. The sage turned to look at Heavenly Mother. Heavenly Mother said in a deep voice, we can't let her obtain the universal law. The sage nodded. Once Wan Jun obtained the universal law, it would undoubtedly be a huge disaster for the Tian family. The two of them no longer hesitated and directly turned into two white lights and disappeared not far away. In the forbidden area for humans, Yi Xian looked up at the distant palace. Miss Wan Jun, what is that? Wan Jun gently stroked the hair beside her ear and softly said, I also don't know what it is. Yi Xian turned to look at Wan Jun. You also don't know? Wan Jun nodded. This place is a forbidden area. Even experts above the eternal realm dare not enter. Moreover, those who have entered before have never left. As she said that, she paused and said, it's said that there is a universal law inside. Yi Xian said, Miss Wan Jun wants to obtain that universal law? Wan Jun nodded. Yi Xian smiled. Then have you thought about how to get out? Wan Jun's expression was calm. If I can't obtain that universal law, I will also die if I leave. Yi Xian understood. This Miss Wan Jun is going all out. At this moment, Wan Jun suddenly said, you are a person with a disaster body, how can you still live for so long? Yi Xian thought for a moment, then said, I am the Misfortune Realm's young lord. The Misfortune Gate trembled. Damn, this person is really going to be shameless. Wan Jun stopped and looked at Yi Xian. You want to shift the blame to the Misfortune Realm. Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. I've been seen through. Wan Jun said softly, your background is not simple, especially that door in your body. That door has already surpassed my understanding. As she said that, she paused and said, that door is hostile to you, but it did not dare to attack you. If I'm not wrong, that door is afraid of something. As Yi Xian glanced at Wan Jun, he sighed inwardly. None of these super experts are simple. They seem to be laughing and joking, but in fact they know very well. Wan Jun suddenly stopped. There was a corpse not far from her and Yi Xian. It was a middle-aged man. When she saw this middle-aged man, Wan Jun's expression became extremely solemn. Yi Xian asked, do you know him? Wan Jun said solemnly, this person is called Qiu Yi. 1,000 years ago he shocked the entire Nether River galaxy because he reached the eternal realm before the age of 30. It can be said that his cultivation speed is unprecedented. But then he disappeared for some reason. I never expected that he would come here. Moreover, he even perished here. Yi Xian looked around. Who killed him? Wan Jun looked at the palace in the distance, her hands clenched, and no one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly walked up to Qiu Yi and bowed slightly. Senior, do you have any inheritance to leave behind? I think I can do it. Wan Jun, the Misfortune Gate. Yi Xian still wanted to speak, but Wan Jun suddenly said, his soul has been destroyed. His soul had been destroyed. Yi Xian glanced at Qiu Yi's corpse and sighed softly. The path of a cultivator was actually a path of no return. Some people would disappear just by walking on this path. The two of them continued forward. Along the way, the two of them fell into silence. Clearly, this was not a simple place. Before long, the two of them stopped again. Not far in front of them, there was another corpse. It was an old man. Yi Xian turned to look at Wan Jun, but she shook her head. I don't know him. The two of them continued forward. Along the way, they saw about a dozen corpses, all of which were giants when they were alive. There were even experts from hundreds of thousands of years ago. The more the two of them walked, the more shocked they became. Even Xian's expression became more and more solemn. One should know that the two of them had no cultivation at all. The two of them got closer to the palace, but they did not encounter any danger along the way, which surprised them. This was not normal. The two of them became even more cautious. Before long, the two of them arrived in front of the palace. It was an ancient palace and the entire place looked a little desolate. A woman sat on the stone steps below the palace. The woman wore white armor and a feathered helmet. She held a silver spear in her hand and she looked rather cold. At this moment, the woman in white armor was looking at Yi Xian and Wan Jun. To be more precise, she was looking at Yi Xian. Yi Xian secretly raised his guard. There was actually a living person here. Wan Jun glanced at the woman but did not say anything. No one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, the woman in white armor suddenly stood up and walked slowly towards Yi Xian. Disaster body, disaster door, disaster karma. Young man, you're really tough to survive until now. Yi Xian was shocked. You know about the disaster door? The woman in white armor stared at Yi Xian. If it wasn't for this door, do you think the two of you could have made it here? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then asked, Senior, you are? The woman in white armor stopped walking. She looked at Yi Xian and suddenly pointed her spear at Yi Xian's abdomen. A trace of killing intent flashed in her eyes. The disaster door wants to divert the disaster? There was no movement from the disaster door. The woman in white armor suddenly put away her spear and sneered. So it was sealed. No wonder it was so low-key. There was still no movement from the disaster door. The woman in white armor looked at Yi Xian. Leave this place. After saying that, she turned and left. Yi Xian suddenly said, Miss, wait. The woman in white armor stopped and turned to look at Yi Xian. What's the matter? Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Miss, what is this disaster door? Inside the prison pagoda, the disaster door suddenly trembled and almost went berserk. Yi Xian did not even care about this stupid door. The woman in white armor looked at Yi Xian. You don't know where it came from? Yi Xian nodded. The woman in white armor said, After I tell you, leave this place and never come back. Is that all right? Wan Jun. Yi Xian blinked. Senior, what do you mean by that? The woman in white armor looked at Yi Xian. You're unlucky. I don't want to be implicated. Yi Xian. Wan Jun. The woman in white armor said again, Is that all right? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then said, Senior, please say it. He really wanted to know the origin of this disaster door. The woman in white armor nodded. There are 9 laws in the universe, and these 9 laws have 9 guardians. The disaster door is the guardian of the disaster law. As a disaster body, you should have fallen long ago, but you've survived until now. Right now, you're defying the heavens, truly defying the heavens, defying the laws of the universe. To put it simply, even if you don't do anything, as long as you're alive, you're defying the heavens. Yi Xian said in a low voice, Even if I do something good, they won't forgive me, right? The woman in white armor looked at Yi Xian. Since you've become a disaster body, it means that you've done something unacceptable in your previous life. In this life, even if you do something good, it will cause disaster karma. Saying this, she seemed to have realized something and her eyes narrowed. Someone changed your fate for you. The person who changed your fate for you not only went against the disaster law, but also the life law, reincarnation law, and karma law. As she said this, she suddenly gave Yi Xian a thumbs up. The person who helped you is awesome. Yi Xian. P.S. Voter. Awesome. Everyone can follow my official account, directly search for it on the Green Phoenix Peak and then click follow. There are games inside. Apart from that, there will be some activities recently, and you can get exquisite games as well as physical books of Sword Realm and Sword Supreme. They're all free. Everyone can follow it. Chapter 1529. One had to admit that the white-armored lady was extremely shocked. Defying the laws of the universe. She knew how difficult that was. As the Tao protector of the universe, she knew how terrifying a single law was. And someone actually helped this youth to defy so many laws of the universe. The white-armored lady suddenly felt that this world was a little dangerous. At the side, Yi Xian shook his head. Actually, I don't know anything. He actually felt extremely sullen. Until now he was still in a daze. All he knew was that along the way he was constantly in trouble, getting beaten up daily, and the enemies were always the abnormal kind. Even their heads were smashed. When would such days come to an end? At this moment the white-armored lady asked again, "Do you know who the enemy is?" Xian looked at the white-armored lady. "Isn't it the cause of misfortune?" The white-armored lady shook her head. "Not just the misfortune law, the enemy should be the Cosmos God Court." Xian frowned. "Cosmos God Court?" The white-armored lady nodded. "I told you before that there are 9 laws of the universe, and within the Cosmos God Court, there are 6 laws of the universe. The misfortune law is one of them." Xian said solemnly, "Is this Cosmos God Court powerful?" The white-armored lady glanced at Xian. "Do you think the door of misfortune is powerful?" Xian hesitated for a while before nodding his head. Even though he didn't like the door of misfortune, he had to admit that it was powerful. With 3 swords, it was almost invincible. The white-armored lady looked at Xian. "And it isn't the misfortune law, it's just the protector of the misfortune law. The real misfortune law is at least 100 or 1,000 times stronger than it." Xian suddenly held his chest. His expression was one of pain. The white-armored lady asked, "What's wrong?" Xian shook his head. "My heart hurts." The white-armored lady. Xian looked at the white-armored lady. "You're also the protector of the universe law. Are you not on the same side as the Cosmos God Court?" The white-armored woman shook her head. "No." As she spoke, she glanced at Xian and said, "Normally speaking, he shouldn't be alive, but he just so happens to be alive. So I'm afraid this matter isn't over." Xian suddenly asked, "Where is the Cosmos God Court?" The white-armored woman asked, "Why do you ask?" Xian said indifferently, "I want to bring my big brother to the Cosmos God Court to train. My big brother has been lonely for more than 100,000 years. I want to take him to have some fun." The door of disaster. The white-armored woman shook her head. "I do not know where the Cosmos God Court is." Xian frowned. "Miss, you don't know?" The white-armored woman nodded. "It's not just me who doesn't know. The gate of misfortune in my body doesn't know either. Only the laws of the universe know." Xian was silent. This was a bit of a headache. If he knew where the Cosmos God Court was, he would really bring swordsmen there. Xian suddenly thought of Qing. Could Qing be looking for the Cosmos God Court? The white-armored woman suddenly said, "Let's go." Xian was about to speak when the white-armored woman shook her head. "No, I have to go." Xian looked at the white-armored woman. The white-armored woman said solemnly, "If I meet him, I might be implicated. Goodbye." As she finished speaking, she turned and left. Xian hurriedly said, "Miss." The white-armored woman turned and looked at Xian. "Is there anything else?" Xian hesitated. Then he said, "Miss, is there a law of the universe here too?" The white-armored woman shook her head. "No. However, there is a law left behind by the law that I guarded. So, outsiders who enter this place will have their cultivation suppressed." Wan Jun suddenly asked, "Were you the one who killed those people earlier?" The white-armored woman nodded. "Yes, I did." Wan Jun glanced at the white-armored woman but didn't say anything. The white-armored woman laughed coldly. "The universal laws and higher laws. These fellows actually want to obtain and control the universal laws. They really don't know their limits." Wan Jun sighed softly in her heart while her expression dimmed down. Her objective this time was to find the universal laws, but it would seem like she had no chance at all. She was already extremely lucky to be able to survive. The white-armored woman didn't speak further. She glanced at Xian's stomach while a trace of killing intent flashed through the depths of her eyes. However, she didn't choose to attack in the end and she just turned around and left. Xian suddenly said, "Miss." The white-armored woman stopped and turned around to look at Xian. Xian smiled. "Miss, it's fate that brought us to know each other. Allow me to give you something." As he spoke, he opened his palm, and then a strand of violet energy surged out from within it. There were over 100 strands of violet energy. A trace of surprise flashed through the white-armored woman's eyes when she saw the violet energy. "What pure violet energy!" Xian smiled. "It's fate that brought us to know each other. If you don't mind, then just accept this violet energy. Of course, if you're afraid of being tainted by calamity because of this, then I can understand." The white-armored woman glanced at Yi Xian. I'm not afraid. As soon as she finished speaking, she put the violet energy away, and then she hesitated for a moment before she said, Can I give you a little more? Yi Xian nodded. Of course. As he spoke, he withdrew another 300 strands of violet energy. The white-armored woman put all of them away, and then she gazed at Yi Xian. I can't take your violet energy for nothing. She opened her palm as she spoke, and then a golden talisman suddenly floated over to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was slightly surprised. What's that? The white-armored woman said, This talisman contains the energy of a universal law within it, and it can seal a person's cultivation after it's utilized. However, it's only a single chance. Yi Xian asked, Can anyone be sealed? The white-armored woman shook her head. Not if they're too strong. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, For example? The white-armored woman pondered deeply for a moment, and then she said, For example, someone who defies the heavens and changes one's fate. Yi Xian understood when he heard this. This thing was probably useless against those with 3 sword strikes, but it would definitely be useful against those with less than that. The only question was whether it would be useful against the door of misfortune. Yi Xian didn't refuse, and he put the talisman away. The white-armored woman glanced at Yi Xian. Be careful of the door of misfortune within you. She's much more terrifying than you'd imagined. Farewell. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and vanished. As soon as the white-armored woman vanished, Yi Xian noticed that the world had suddenly started to change. The energy of the seal was slowly vanishing. Wan Jun suddenly said, Do you think she's recuperating here? Yi Xian spoke softly, That's not important. Wan Jun nodded. She knew what Yi Xian meant to form a good relationship. Yi Xian suddenly said, Miss Wan Jun, what's your next plan? Wan Jun was silent. Yi Xian said, Miss Wan Jun, I'm afraid we'll have to part ways soon. Wan Jun nodded and she looked at Yi Xian. Thank you for saving me. Yi Xian smiled. No problem. By the way, Miss Wan Jun is a member of the Tian family. How did you end up like this? Wan Jun was silent. Yi Xian smiled. If it's not convenient to say, Wan Jun sat to the side and softly said, My father was the previous Tian family's patriarch, and at that time I was the Tian family's young master. One day my father and my second uncle, who is the current Tian family's patriarch Tian Lin, went to Sword Abyss in Styx Starfield. 10 days later my second uncle returned. However, my father fell. My second uncle said that my father was in danger in Sword Abyss. I didn't believe it and wanted to use the family's power to investigate, but my second uncle became the patriarch with the support of some elders. After he became the patriarch, he immediately eliminated some elders who supported me and wanted to kill me for treason, but was stopped by my Tian family's celestial master. After saying that, she sneered, Then I was imprisoned in Burial Mountain by the family for 1,000 years. During the time I was imprisoned, my father's bloodline was almost slaughtered. Now I'm the only one left. Yi Xian whispered, Father should have been killed by my second uncle. Wan Jun faced Yi Xian. It's not should have been, it's him. Everyone in the Tian family knows that he did it. Yi Xian frowned slightly. Why didn't the Tian family do anything? Moreover, they allowed him to become the Tian family's patriarch. Wan Jun shook her head. Because after my father's death, the only one who can bear the responsibility of the Tian family is my second uncle. He is also the strongest person in the Tian family. If the Tian family chose to punish him, then my Tian family will instantly be torn apart. For the sake of the big picture, the elders of the Tian family could only sacrifice our bloodline to protect the Tian family. Speaking of this, her expression suddenly turned ferocious. It's a pity that hundreds of people in my family were all killed. Yi Xian sighed. Such a family is even more complicated than an emperor's family in the secular world. Wan Jun looked up at the sky, clenched her fists, and her nails pierced deep into her palms. If I don't take revenge for this blood feud, I Tian Wan Jun am not a human. Speaking of this, she turned her head to look at Yi Xian. I'm sorry. That time I lured you to save me and dragged you into my Tian family's whirlpool, implicating you. Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment, both of them suddenly turned around. Not far away from them there were 2 people walking towards them. The sage and Heavenly Mother. The sage looked at Yi Xian. You've obtained the universal law. Yi Xian was speechless. Damn it, this misunderstanding is too big. That white-armored woman just left and the seal here disappeared. Obviously, these two thought that they had obtained the universal law. At this time the sage added, Your Excellency, we don't wish to be enemies with you. As long as you're willing to hand over the universal law, my Tian family will never be enemies with you. Yi Xian smiled. If I say that I didn't obtain the universal law, would you believe me? The sage looked at Yi Xian. Do you think I will believe you? Yi Xian smiled. If I hand over the universal law, will you really let me go? The sage nodded. I will. Yi Xian blinked his eyes. Do you think I will believe you? The sage squinted his eyes. I know there's someone behind me, but do you know who I'm facing? It's the Tian family. Do you know the Tian family? Yi Xian turned his head and looked at Wan Jun. Wan Jun calmly said, The Tian family, the #1 family in Stick Star Field, a super force. With a single flag, 10,000 worlds will surrender. Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, Heavenly Mother suddenly said, Why is there a need to talk nonsense with him? In this Stick Star Field, why would my Tian family be afraid of anyone? If there's someone behind him, we'll just eliminate them together. As her voice fell, she suddenly disappeared from her spot. The space in the field was suddenly torn apart. At this moment, the surroundings had returned to normal because the universal law seal had completely disappeared. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.